The following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. Story 1. An investigation into think tech. A cry for help. This may not be reality. I may be posting this to the abyss or not at all. Is this a cry for help or all part of a greater plan larger than I can comprehend? My mind is rattled. It has been undone. This world is built on secrets, and I was one of the few who made a living uncovering them. My name is irrelevant now, but for years I have been a private investigator, priding myself on discretion and efficiency. I have lived a secluded life. The connections I have made have been fleeting at best. It's easy to be pessimistic and untrustworthy of people with what I have seen and uncovered in my time. Nothing could have prepared me for the nightmare I stumbled into at ThinkTech. As I try to piece together the fragments of my memory, I can't shake the feeling that some of what I remember might not be my own. ThinkTech stood as a fortress of innovation, its public face a beacon of hope for Alzheimer's and dementia patients, commissioned by an anonymous employer. My mission was to delve into their brain imaging and altering technology. The deeper I dug, the more sinister the rumors became. Whispers of mind control, secret experiments, and people who vanished without a trace. I knew I needed to get in, to truly uncover their secrets. My entry into ThinkTech was facilitated not by subterfuge, but an invitation under the guise of a journalist, an aspiring writer in the medical technology field ready to sing ThinkTech's praises. Of course, this would be of interest to the shareholders. The facility was a shrine to ThinkTech's triumphs, with portraits of beaming scientists and heartfelt accounts of miraculous recoveries. Yet, there was something off in the way the staff moved and interacted, an undercurrent of dread that intuition whispered to me. The hallways didn't evoke a feeling of positivity or optimism from patients being treated, just a feeling that this was all a mere plastic facade ready to be torn down, exposing the hidden truths. Staff continued to move in a hush-hush manner, avoiding my gaze as I was shown around the sterile facility. In my research, Dr. Emily Carter emerged as a person of interest, a neuroscientist celebrated for her breakthroughs, yet enshrouded in mystery. No backstory, no origin, as if she appeared out of thin air. It took some digging, but I discovered she was deeply involved in classified projects. I knew I needed to talk to her, try and get her to reveal things not known. As I was being shown around the facility, I was introduced to a few of the scientists working on the many projects under ThinkTech's umbrella. Amongst them, Dr. Emily Carter. For such a decorated scientist, she was very quiet and subdued. She was successfully avoiding my not-so-subtle gaze, and my attempts to grab her attention were proving futile, pulling myself away from the obviously meticulously planned PR spiel of the numerous scientists. I walked towards Dr. Carter. Before I could get a word out, her eyes darted to the corners of the room, pointing out the multitude of cameras following everyone's every move. It was clear that I wouldn't be able to get any information out of her here. I extended a handshake and smiled. She reciprocated the action. With a bead of sweat appearing in her forehead, she uttered the words, "Hillside View," after which she turned and left. I was taken aback at first, caught off guard, confused. When I started to ponder on the words "hillside view," I was reminded of a case of mine from many years ago, of an insurance scam gone wrong. A hotel was burnt down with families stuck inside. The owner of the hotel couldn't afford to keep the hotel in good condition. Its floors warped and twisted, hallways in various states of disrepair. He burnt it down to get a new start, one that never came. All that is left of the Hillside View Hotel is a charred mass of wood and bricks. The doorway to the lobby still stands, almost in defiance of what the owner chose to do. What could Dr. Carter possibly have meant by this? Was it linked to ThinkTech? Was it a warning? Could it possibly be an opportunity to meet? Hoping it was the latter, I knew I needed to pay the Hillside View Hotel a visit. I pulled up to the hotel in my car. It appeared dark, a black mass imposing against the already night sky. I sat in my car wondering why I was here. How did Dr. Carter know this place was linked to me? How was she able to see through my journalist identity? Before I could comprehend what was happening, a shrouded figure opened my car's back door, sat down and closed the door behind them. I didn't dare look back. Not wanting to catch a bullet to the head, I waited. I waited for the figure to speak, to shed some light on my current situation. I waited. Looking in the rear view, I caught a glimpse of their silhouette, appearing almost familiar but shrouded in darkness. "You don't know what you're getting into," she whispered. "You don't know how far this goes. You might not come back," a tremble in her voice. Extending out of the dark, a hand appeared, holding out a keycard and an address. It appeared glinting in the moonlight, a gateway to the next chapter. I took the items and inspected them. Before I could say anything, the figure was gone, fleeing into the night. I debated on what my next move should be, pondering my safety. However, my drive to seek out the unknown forever pulls me deeper into the darkness. Following the address, it brought me to some woods on the outskirts of the city, illuminated only by the glow of the night sky. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, guiding my car deeper into the dense woods. Not knowing what lied ahead, the trees loomed like sentinels, their gnarled branches intertwining above to form a claustrophobic canopy that blotted out what little light there was. The air grew heavier, and the forest seemed to swallow the gravel road, each turn leading me further from the world I knew. The address scribbled on a piece of paper sat on the passenger seat, a cryptic beacon given to me by a shrouded figure outside a part of my career from many years ago. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was driving into a trap, the sinister atmosphere mirroring a dark chapter from my past. Years ago, I had navigated through a different kind of darkness. I spiraled into a void where the days blurred together in a haze of grief and self-destruction. I repressed the source of this pain to allow me to keep going, to allow me to uncover the treachery of the world as repentance for my previous lack of action. The suffocating forest now felt like an echo of those days, each tree a reminder of the walls I had built around myself. I feel now a familiar sense of dread, an abyss threatening to engulf me. The memories of sleepless nights and relentless self-reproach surged back with every mile, intertwining with the present danger. Yet, just as I clawed his way out of that personal hell, I knew I had to confront whatever lay ahead, hoping this journey into the shadows would bring me one step closer to salvation. As I emerged into the forest clearing, the sight before me was nothing short of surreal. In the midst of the dense, wild underbrush and towering trees, a solitary door stood erect, untouched by time or nature. The clearing itself was unnaturally circular, the surrounding trees bending away as if repelled by some unseen force emanating from the door. There were small walls either side, indication of a staircase being just beyond the door, its surface polished and pristine, unnaturally so. The door's presence was profoundly eerie, a stark contrast to the raw, untamed forest. It stood as an anomaly, an element so out of place that it twisted the fabric of reality around it. A cold breeze whispered through the clearing, rustling leaves and carrying with it a faint, almost inaudible hum that set me on edge. The door's handle gleamed, seemingly inviting, yet menacing. I felt a chill creep up my spine, as if the very air around him held its breath, waiting for him to make a move. Watching, every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but an inexplicable pull drew me closer, compelling me to face whatever mystery lay beyond the uncanny threshold. Inside the door was a long, narrow staircase descending deep into the darkness, an unsettling invitation into ThinkTech's inner sanctum. The contrast was jarring. One moment I was surrounded by the organic, chaotic life of the forest, and the next, I was staring into a passage that seemed to defy the natural order. The staircase was made of cold steel, each step sharp and perfect, almost as if I was the first person to ever come across this place. Bright, shimmering lights lined the walls at precise intervals, casting ghostly shadows that danced in the periphery of my vision. The air that wafted up from below was damp and musty, carrying the scent of earth and something else, something metallic and unsettling. With each step I took, the walls seemed to close in tighter, the oppressive silence broken only by the echo of my footsteps. The narrowness of the staircase amplified my unease, making me feel as though I was descending into the bowels of the earth, towards an unseen presence, a malevolent force waiting at the end of my journey. Yet I continued downward, each step a reluctant but necessary advance into the unknown. Finally reaching the bottom of the stairwell, I was enveloped by a silence so profound it felt suffocating, each breath a struggle against the oppressive stillness. Turning back around to look up at the staircase I had just descended, the world felt impossibly far away. In contrast to the staircase, this room was not well lit up only by the glow of the staircase. Shadows pressed in from all sides, thick and impenetrable, as if the darkness itself were alive, conspiring to swallow me whole. I moved forward cautiously, my footsteps echoing in the eerie void, until I stumbled upon a gallery that sent a chill through my bones. Lining the walls were photographs of missing persons, faces frozen in time, eyes wide with terror and desperation. It was immediately clear that these were captives, not volunteers. The name Project Mind's Eye was scrawled ominously across a large, decrepit sign hanging crookedly on the wall. My stomach churned as I realized the true horror of this place. Project Mind's Eye was not merely for observation, but for control. In the dim light, I could make out grotesque diagrams pinned to the walls, showing devices implanted in the subjects' skulls. These crude contraptions were designed to strip individuals of their autonomy, turning them into mere puppets for some sinister purpose. The cold, clinical nature of the setting clashed horribly with the reality of the human suffering it inflicted. My mind raced, the enormity of the revelation crashing over me like a wave. Each photograph, each diagram, each desperate face etched into my memory as I stood there, a lone witness to the depths of human depravity. As I documented this horror, the realization struck me. ThinkTech was expecting me. My every move had been orchestrated. They didn't need to hunt me down. They knew where I was at every moment. The door was opened, not to pursuers, but to guide me and others potentially like me deeper into the dark. A symphony of mechanical hums filled the air, the source elusive yet omnipresent. I felt rooted to the spot, a silent observer to unseen horrors. A door creaked open at the end of the room, its ominous presence beckoning me to uncover what lay beyond. But as I stood there, staring into the gaping maw of further darkness, my usual controlled disposition faltered. The weight of the photographs and diagrams, the faces of the missing and tormented, pressed heavily on my psyche. Fear surged through me, raw and unrelenting, eroding my resolve. My instinct for self-preservation screamed louder than my curiosity. I could feel the icy tendrils of dread creeping up my spine, tightening their grip around my heart. With a shaky breath, I made the decision to retreat, each step backward a surrender to the overwhelming terror that had seized me. The suffocating silence, the oppressive shadows, and the horrific revelations of Project Mind's Eye were too much to bear. As I turned away from the open door, I could only hope that retreating now would give me the strength to return and face this nightmare another day. My escape was a calculated retreat, not a desperate flight. For days, I didn't leave my apartment trying to piece together what I had witnessed. What was their plan? How far had they spread? The feeling of being watched was an unshakable companion. I couldn't shake the unease that had settled in my bones. The shadows outside seemed to thicken and become larger with every night that passed, taking on a life of their own. From my window, I noticed them lurking on the streets below, their indistinct forms blending seamlessly with the darkness. They stood still, their presence ominous and foreboding, as if they were waiting for the right moment to strike. I pulled the curtains, hoping to shut out the unnerving sight, but the sense of being watched persisted. Moving through my apartment, I could almost feel these shadowy figures within the complex itself, lingering just beyond my door in the hallways, their vague silhouettes flickering in the dim light. Every creak and rustle seemed amplified, my senses on high alert as paranoia gnawed at me. The walls of my sanctuary felt increasingly thin, unable to keep out the creeping dread that these figures brought with them. It was clear that whatever dark forces I had encountered in the forest had followed me home, and there was no escaping their watchful eyes. These shadowy figures affirmed ThinkTech's awareness of my investigation. The final confrontation was not violent, but a quiet breach of my sanctuary through the front door in the dead of night. In the pitch black, there was a presence. Dr. Carter stood before me with a group of men, quiet and with blank expressions. "We are only trying to help," she pleaded, her voice a siren's call, beckoning for my compliance. "This is not down to us, but to those that can't be seen. Just as I stretched out my hand to you to bring you in, they stretched out theirs to bring us in." A laptop was presented to me, the only file on it, a video titled Patient Eye. My fingers hesitated over the keyboard before double-clicking the icon. The footage, grainy and unfocused, showed a woman strapped to a chair, electrodes attached to her head. The room was dimly lit, but had a sense of familiarity to it, evoking a feeling I had a few nights before. Had this been what lay beyond the door that I turned away from? The video played, revealing the woman's face wide with terror, her body convulsing as she struggled against the restraints. Her screams echoed through the speakers, piercing and desperate. "Where am I? Who are you?" Her pleas remained unanswered. A scientist stepped towards the center of the room. "The time is 1900 hours on the 10th of March, 2004. We are here with patient I, Emily. Emily has struggled through the foster system due to her mental health. Emily has displayed signs of childhood dementia. She has trouble concentrating, understanding, learning and communicating, frequent personality changes, severely disturbed sleep and behavioral issues such as hyperactivity. She is the perfect test subject to test out our new treatment." From this video, it was clear ThinkTech was providing this treatment without proper permission or authority. Pursuing progress, no matter the cost. The video continues with the scientist explaining the procedure. "Our treatment seeks to implant a device into the patient's brain. We will be stimulating it after insertion with an electronic pulse provided by the electrodes around the patient's head. This will activate said device to act as a bridge between various sections of the brain, allowing information to be stored and transferred on demand. A second brain, if you will. Dementia patients will no longer have to rely on the fragility of their own organic structures. The device will pick up every impulse sent through it." "What do you want with me?" The child screamed, holding back tears, the chilling intensity of her voice sending shivers up my spine. I could see the raw fear etched into her features, her gaze darting around the room as if trying to escape the horrors of the reality she was in. A new figure stepped into the frame, a much older man. His expression was one of cold, clinical detachment, a stark contrast to the girl's frantic terror. He glanced at the monitors, then at his team, his voice calm and commanding. "Initiate the sequence," he ordered. Not one person flinched or stalled for even a moment, beginning the sequence in synchronous harmony. Like drones, no sign of unease or uncertainty that they might not be right. The girl's screams intensified for a moment, then morphed into a monotonous drone. Her eyes glazing over, she fell silent. Even from the video, the silence in the room was palpable. It was as if time had stopped, everyone waiting for the child to speak and show signs of life. "I'm not alone in here anymore, am I?" Her voice, now void of emotion, repeated the haunting refrain like a broken record. The room around her seemed to pulse with a dark energy, the shadows on the grainy footage appearing to shift and writhe as if alive. The older man watched impassively, taking notes as the girl's words grew increasingly disjointed, her mind fracturing under the relentless pressure. "They are in my head. They control me. They are telling me things. They want more." The camera zoomed in on her face, capturing every twitch and spasm, every flicker of madness that crossed her eyes. Her transformation from a terrified human to a hollow shell was recorded in excruciating detail. The video ended abruptly, the screen going black, leaving me in a silence that felt louder than the screams. My heart pounded in my chest, and a cold sweat clung to my skin. The shadows in my apartment seemed to stretch and lengthen, the memory of the girl's tortured cries echoing in my mind. Who are they? What did she mean by, "I'm not alone in here anymore, am I?" All these questions raced through my mind. I briefly forgot I was in my room surrounded by ThinkTech's personnel. Then it clicked. The child, Emily. Doctor. Carter watched as the realization came to my face. Too stunned to speak, Doctor. Carter filled the air, not with her quiet and frightened voice that she had presented previously, but one similar to the cold and clinical nature of the older man in the video. I wouldn't be where I am today without them. They made me who I am. You only need to let them in. In that moment, be it clarity or madness, I grasped ThinkTech's true horror. They had not merely unlocked minds, they had opened doors to realms unfathomable, and within those depths lurked unseen powers. I was left with the question of how much of Emily is truly left. Is her body merely acting as a conduit for whatever them is, or is she still in there? With no control of the wheel, witnessing whatever horrors she has been made to watch in the last 20 years. I was told what to do, how to fix people, rid people of their pain, bring people's loved ones back from the brink. Can't you see that? I know what happened to you. Don't you want rid of those memories? The pain? Dr. Carter beckoned to me. The horror of ThinkTech's true intentions began to hit me. The anonymous company that had hired me was ThinkTech itself. They sought out reclusive individuals like myself, those who had been through hardship, knowing no one would come looking when we vanished or changed beyond recognition. I was just a pawn in a game repeated many times before. ThinkTech slowly amassing an army of meat puppets. Do ThinkTech even know what they are doing, or have they collectively lost control, being controlled by an invisible entity or entities? The shadows in my room began to get longer and darker, enveloping all that is around me. A sudden dizziness washed over me, and I stumbled backward, feeling as though the ground had shifted beneath my feet. When I regained my bearings, I found myself sitting alone in the very same dimly lit room from the tape. I was disoriented and afraid. The same metallic smell and hum was present from before. I knew there was no point screaming out for help. I was truly alone, no one could possibly help me. I began to feel a tingling sensation in the back of my head. It was as if I could feel another presence in my mind, a sinister consciousness lurking just beyond the edges of my awareness. At first, it was just whispers, faint echoes that seemed to emanate from the depths of my own thoughts. But as I struggled to make sense of the situation, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they became a cacophony of voices, each one vying for control. I could feel them rifling through my memories, rewriting them, twisting them into something unrecognizable. Panic surged within me as I realized that I was no longer alone inside my own head. I tried to fight back, to assert my own will, but it was like trying to hold back a tidal wave with my bare hands. The presence in my mind was relentless, a puppeteer pulling at the strings of my consciousness with chilling precision. Every thought, every action was no longer my own. It was dictated by the unseen force that now held sway over me. I watched in horror as my body attempted to move of its own accord, like a marionette on strings, carrying out commands that I couldn't even comprehend. It was as if I were a prisoner in my own mind, forced to witness the unfolding nightmare from behind a veil of helplessness. And as the realization sank in that I was no longer in control, that I was nothing more than a vessel for this malevolent force, I knew that there was no escape. I was trapped, bound to this entity that now inhabited my mind. What was its goal? What was its purpose? Before I could work this out, I was thrust back into the darkness, encased within the walls of my head, a space that seemed to close in with malevolent intent. An infinite darkness. I was faced with the ultimate violation, not of home or privacy, but of self. In this new reality where consciousness could be commandeered, the terror lay in discerning what remained truly mine. Doctor, Carter's voice, so cold and detached, echoed in my mind. I was told what to do, how to fix people, rid people of their pain. How many people are not who they seem? How many people have been changed? ThinkTech are creating conduits for something beyond our comprehension to peer through, no longer watching us but taking control. I awoke in my apartment, sat at my desk. I knew I had to expose them, to warn the world. But as I sat in my dimly lit study, paranoia wrapped around me like a vice. Every shadow seemed to hide a pair of watching eyes. Every sound a whisper of something unseen. My own thoughts no longer felt like my own. In the end, it wasn't the fear of what think tech could do to my body that paralyzed me. It was the knowledge that they had already claimed my mind. The true horror of think tech was not just in their experiments, but in the realization that I might never know which of my thoughts were truly mine and which were theirs. Everything I see and do can be altered, changed, generated. For all I know, I'm stuck inside my own mind prison, being placated by them by being allowed to write this out, never to be seen by a soul, only existing within the bounds of my head. As I type this, I feel myself further falling into paranoia and madness. I'm unsure if these are my words or theirs. Is this a warning or a trap laid by them? I share this, not knowing if it's a desperate attempt by what's left of myself to reach out, or if it's think tech using me to spread their influence further. To whoever reads this, beware. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. Story 2. How I took my life back. I live in a small, rural town that was nestled away from the hustle and bustle of city life in an area not that far from Richmond, Virginia. It's the kind of town that would take about 20 minutes to drive from one end to the other. There's this main road that cuts straight down the center of town, and everything is situated alongside or branching off from it. My house sat on a hill, just in front of a thick patch of trees which separated my house from the next street. The next street over in that particular direction was a little over half a mile, but as a kid it felt as big as the Amazon. I loved playing in the woods, and the sound of the leaves crunching underfoot as I ran from imaginary monsters or towards a castle in the trees. Those were good, simpler times. I'm an only child and I never really made any friends in school. Quite the opposite. Actually, I was bullied the entire time I was in school, until it happened. For the meantime, however, I found my solace using my imagination to take me on grand adventures under the shady canopy. One of the things that always interested me were the many different spiders that could be found living within these woods, all of various shapes and sizes, some harmless and others pretty lethal. They would adorn the trees like 8-legged ornaments. I would imagine I were a secret agent on a dangerous mission, dodging the almost invisible webs as if they were laser beams and could slice off an arm like butter. I've never been afraid of spiders, but I have always felt pity for them. As soon as any person sees one of them, their immediate reaction is to kill it, and that's a terrible way to live for any creature, spider and human alike. Because of this, if I would ever spot a spider inside my house or somewhere that was potentially dangerous for them, I'd always try to gently pick it up and take it to safety. I'd use a piece of cardboard or a stick and usher the little guy on, then carry them outside or to the grass or something and let them walk off. If I found one that I thought was especially interesting, like one with bright colors or abnormally long legs, I'd take it to the biggest tree in the woods and place it on a branch. Now it might sound silly to you, but I'd also talk to them too. They wouldn't talk back, obviously. I didn't think I was having real conversations with them or anything like that. I'd speak to them like you'd speak to your pet. I would always say hello whenever I saw them, and I'd apologize if I ever disturbed one of their meticulously crafted webs. I saw the spiders, and all creatures really, as equals to people. After all, we are, every one of us here on Earth, just trying to survive. My father, however, did not share my optimistic disposition. My father was, well, let's just say he was never going to win a Father of the Year award. My mother, God rest her soul, died giving birth to me, and I've always felt like he blamed me for it. From the stories my neighbors and aunt have told me, she was the sweetest person they'd ever met, and way too good for someone like my father. Shortly after my mum's passing, my Aunt Rose stayed with us for the first 5 years of my life or so, and things were about as good as they could be for people in our situation. But that all changed when one day I came home from school to find my aunt sitting on our porch alongside all her things. When I asked what was going on, she just simply stated that she had to leave and couldn't live with us anymore. It was only on one of my father's late-night benders that I found out she had tried to make a move on the old man, only for him to violently react with a slap to her face and a boot out the door. That day was the true start of his, and consequently my, downfall. He drank like a fish just about every night I can remember since then, and I actively avoided him every chance that I could. Some afternoons I'd come in to see him lazily slumped in his recliner, still clutching his precious and empty bottle. There was one night in particular he would drink much more than his usual amount, a day I had grown to despise and never looked forward to, my birthday. On that day, when I got off the school bus and headed down my long, curving driveway and into the woods as usual, I would make it a point to stay out later than normal to avoid dealing with my dad. Most of the time, even though it broke Dad's back before dark rule, I would walk into our little trailer to find his bedroom door shut and locked, with his obnoxious snores coming from inside. On my 11th birthday, however, it seemed my luck had finally run out. I had just walked in a little late from another escapade in the woods. As soon as I walked in, I could smell the liquor permeating the air of the small trailer. "Where you been, boy?" my father asked in a gruff tone before bringing the bottle of whiskey to his lips. I stammered a bit, but finally said, I was just outside playing with some friends, and He cut me off with a loud scoff. "You think you're funny? Boy, look at you. I know you ain't got no friends. You know my rules. Boy, I told you to be in this house before dark. Yet here you are coming in without a care in the world, and lies falling out of your mouth like ain't nobody waiting up for you." He took another swig of the dark liquid and looked me in the eyes. My heart started to race and my face grew hot. He smiled and said, "You know what to do. Go pick a switch." Now, for anyone who doesn't know, when your parents tell you to get a switch, they mean go outside and find a skinny, flexible stick so I can beat you with it, or I'll pick one myself. And trust me, you did not want them to get one. So, begrudgingly, I went outside and did as I was told. When I came back inside, my father was standing up, bottle still in hand, and a stone-cold look of hate on his face. Hot tears began to form around my eyes as I said, "I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't mean to." He snatched the stick from my hand and yelled, "Are you about to give me lip? Boy, today of all days. I don't take back talk from arrogant little shits like you." He sat the bottle down and cocked his arm back, starting to whip me relentlessly and aiming for any bit of bare skin he could see. After about 8 or 9 swings, the stick started breaking into strands with every impact, leaving hot, stinging pain all over my body. Through my ensuing wails, I heard him chuckle. "Oh, now you've done it. Boy, you really thought you could bring me this hunk of shit and get away easy. Huh?" He dropped the broken piece of wood in his hand and grabbed the bottle off the countertop, taking a long drink. After he set it back down, his hands went to his belt, undoing the latch. "You better make a decision, boy." My heart stopped. Suspended in the eternity of seconds, it took him to remove the belt while fear bubbled inside me. "Do you want bruises on the front or back? Hurry up now, or I'm just going to start swinging wherever I want." He grunted as he gathered the belt in his hand. I began crying uncontrollably at this point, and therefore wasn't able to answer right away, which only made him angrier. I wiped the stinging tears away from my eyes and saw him glaring daggers at me. "Time's up," he said as he raised his hand up, preparing to unload his fury on me with the belt. I shut my eyes and tensed my body, ready for the imminent impact, my heart feeling as if it wanted to beat out of my chest. It's not true what they say, you know, about your life flashing before your eyes when you think you're going to die. In that moment, all I could see and hear was blackness. The world fell away, and my only thought was that I would die. "Ah, what the fuck?" my father called out as I heard the loud smack of a hand against skin. I opened my eyes to see the old man standing with his hand on the back of his neck. He pulled it away to reveal the squished remains of a spider in his palm. "Stupid fucking bugs," he shouted as he wiped his hand on his pants. I looked up at him, and a sudden wild idea crossed my mind, filling my face with heat. When I saw him reach over for the bottle, I acted without further hesitation. I bolted past him and ran for the door, not bothering to look back at the man I called my father. I heard his angry grunts as he downed the remaining alcohol, just as I reached the door and turned the knob. The door flew open and I shot out of it like a bullet, heading into the woods. My heart beat like a drum, and my vision was blurry from the tears. But I knew that if my dad caught me, he would probably actually kill me. I heard him shouting from the house, but I didn't look back. I pushed on. My mind was still back in the house, but my feet were on autopilot, carrying me towards the safety of the trees. I had run through these woods so many times before. I could probably run blindfolded and not hit a single tree. I reached the big one and stopped, my lungs burning with relentless intensity. I sat down and propped myself up against the tree, panting heavily and sweating. I tried to steady my breathing while still listening out for my father, but in my panic I thought I must have lost him. I turned slowly and stuck my head around the edge of the trunk, just as a size 12 steel toe boot was launched into my face, the force knocking me backwards. I screamed in agony as pain exploded throughout my head, blood already beginning to pour from my freshly broken nose. "You're gonna regret running away. Boy, you took my wife from me, the light of my life. You sucked all the life out of her like the mosquito you are, and you took my angel from me. My life has been hell ever since, and all you ever do is disobey me and make excuses. So, since you love these damn woods so much, I might as well bury you here and fix all my problems." My father snarled at me. I shut my eyes and tensed my body, preparing for the inevitable strike that would end my life. But it never came. Instead, I heard the loud thud of something massive hitting the ground. I opened my eyes when I heard the blood-curdling scream of my father to see an ungodly sight. There, standing impossibly in front of me, was an enormous spider, with legs as thick as telephone poles and mandibles as long as my arm. It lunged at my father and bit down on his shoulder, leaving 2 huge holes when it pulled away. The wounds instantly darkened, and my father's blood began to bubble around the edges of the holes. His body stiffened and he screamed again, falling over to the ground. I sat paralyzed with fear, my heart feeling like it would explode at any second. My father's body, however, was paralyzed by other means, for he remained stiff while continuing to scream and plead for help. The monster then turned its eyes to me, blinking a few of them. "Do not be afraid, young one," a voice spoke in my mind. The spider's huge mandibles produced chittering and clicking sounds as the words entered my head, and I knew it was speaking to me. "We do not mean you any harm, little one. He, however, will not be so lucky," the beast clicked, rolling my father's body underneath its massive body as it began to cocoon my still wailing dad. It spoke again. "Do you remember me, little one? It has been many nights since then. I was the first you brought here, to this tree. For countless decades, your kind have been hostile to us, ending our lives beneath their heels or swatting us with newspapers. It is why we birth so many young, for most of them shall never get the chance to live a full life. You, however, are different." It then finished the cocoon, and the words continued in my brain. "Ever since you brought me here, I have grown and I have watched you. Since then, you have continued to show kindness to many of us. These woods are filled with those who have benefited from your selfless actions." My father then made a gurgling noise as he tried to choke out my name. It seemed the toxin was spreading all over, for when I looked into his eyes, they were a dark shade of purple. No irises to speak of. He tried to talk, but it sounded like his throat was closing up because he produced a wheezing sound. I looked back to the spider and asked, "Is he going to die?" The monster chittered its response. "Not for another few hours. No, he will stay paralyzed until it is over. However, and he will feel everything until the end. Does this upset you?" I paused for a minute and shook my head, then asked another question. "So wait, that spider that bit him in my house, is that how you watched me?" Another few gurgling and coughing sounds came from my father before the spider replied, clicking its wet mandibles together. "Of course. As I said, these woods are filled with those who owe you their lives. He was to alert us if ever things got too bad, but he chose to give his life to help you of his own accord. Before he died, he released a pheromone which alerted us to danger, and that is when I knew something was wrong. Many more of my kind would gladly do the same. It's because of you that most of us are here. A small feeling of pride welled up inside me, and for once in a long time, I felt loved. My good feelings were gone an instant later, when once again my father choked on words which would not form. I walked over and crouched down so my face was close to his, studying all the dark veins under his skin. "What was that?" was all I said. After about half a minute of gags and gurgles, he finally said, "I'm sorry. Son, please, help me." I looked into his dark, sick eyes, stood up and said, "Are you about to give me lip? Boy, you know the rules. Pick a switch. Better hurry up, or I'll decide for you." His eyes grew wide as our moment of clarifying silence hung in the air. Slowly, I backed away from him and looked over to the monstrous spider and gave him a nod of confirmation. The beast shrieked in delight, while dozens of spiders descended down from branches and slowly covered my still choking father, beginning to wrap around his coffin made of web. Within minutes, he was completely secured in webbing, and I stood there, patiently waiting until his muffled groans fell silent. A vicious smile crept its way across my face as I watched the hundreds of strands descend upon him, lifting him slowly into the trees as if he were being raptured. A sudden relief washed over me, and my eyes began to water while I looked upon the denizens of the trees. Thank you all," I said to my unlikely saviors, these supposed pests abhorred by society, and I turned away to head back up to my now empty house. The chittering and scurrying of millions of tiny legs following me brought an almost alien emotion back into my life. Joy. I didn't write this as some sort of confession or form of atonement in any way. Oh no, this is a testament to the tenacity of life, the will to survive. My father was a real piece of shit, and even now, after 3 long years without him, I do not regret what happened. In fact, I revel in knowing that he isn't around to spread his hateful nature anymore, because with his life taken, mine could finally start. Shortly after this, I began going to school again, because even I knew that if I went missing from school, cops would be involved. So I kept my head down for the most part. But never again did I allow myself to be bullied. It's funny how one small little creature can make someone sick for days, or leave burning welts all over your skin, or even kill you. Word spread quickly amongst the delinquents about weird shit seeming to happen with anyone who fucked with me. And eventually they left me alone. Everyone left me alone. My only friends now are the 8-legged inhabitants of the woods, and I very much prefer it that way. Let this serve as a warning to those of you who treat others as lesser life forms than yourself. All life has value, no matter how small. Story 3. My friend invited me to a sleepover at his house. We weren't allowed to wake up before his parents. When I was 11, I was at the very bottom of my class until the teacher, Ms. Henry, made me sit next to the new kid. Thomas and his family moved into town halfway through term, so he just sort of appeared one day. During his second week, Ms. Henry tried to draw him out of his shell by asking about his favorite TV program. "What's a TV program?" he replied. That got a laugh. Clearly, he was playing dumb to put one over on her. Everybody thought he'd emerge as the next class clown, but instead he rarely spoke and aced every subject. A few girls tried befriending him. They dug that Children of the Corn look, I guess, but agreed he was a weirdo after chatting with him in the lunch hall. As desk buddies, he and I locked horns. A lot. Because I was left-handed, our elbows bumped together whenever we wrote, and he got super pissed anytime I asked to borrow a pencil. So I, of course, did this as often as possible. Anytime I asked Ms. Henry to split us up, she'd just sneer and say, "Ryan, there's going to be times in life when you're forced to spend time with people you don't like. Get used to it." One day, as I struggled with a difficult maths exam, Thomas offered to help. I'm guessing he finished early and got bored. It was my first A, without either of us ever agreeing to it. He started helping me with homework and tough assignments, and soon my grades improved so much my mom bought me a bunch of Pokemon cards as reward. I offered Thomas some of the one I already owned, but he didn't even know what a Pokemans was. Then one day, Out of the blue, he asked if I'd sleep over at his place. "Father really wants to meet you," he said. Why did his parents even know who I was? We sat together, sure. But he knew so little about pop culture, getting through a conversation was like chewing cult. Still, I wanted to thank him for his help, and my mom didn't raise any objections. So that Friday I packed some clothes and cycled over to his place. I drove down several short roads flanked by woods, past a train station, toward the outskirts of town. Thomas's two-story house sat at the top of a long driveway so steep that I needed to jump off my bike and push most of the way. And all the windows were either boarded up or had the curtains pulled shut. Things got spooky the second I arrived. Thomas and his parents waited patiently to greet me, each grinning like they were on a poster for tooth whitening. Everybody had matching blonde hair and dressed in plain shades of brown, grey, and white. A large man introduced them as the Donovans. My preteen brain categorized him and his wife as old, but in retrospect, there must have been a 20-year age difference there. Mr. Donovan walked my bike into the garage while me and Thomas followed his mom inside. Something was wrong with the house. It looked too sterile. No clutter, zero toys scattered about. Plus, the antique furniture was older than my grandparents'. In every room, sheets had been draped over objects mounted along the paneled walls. And Mrs. Donovan made a point of telling me that touching the sheets is strictly forbidden. She led us into a sitting room decorated with crucifixes, and more crucifixes, of varying sizes. We kneeled down on a colorful rug, facing each other. The only sound was the ticking of a grandfather clock. At last, Mr. Donovan joined our group and led a prayer for the standard stuff. Good health, blessed weather. Even though I'd gone to Protestant church with my grandparents, I couldn't figure out what religion we were meant to be practicing. He obviously thought of himself as a spiritual leader and devoted a lot of time to the blind sinners who would suffer swift retribution on Judgment Day. It wasn't until he called for a minute of holy silence that I heard a low, shaken voice. I concentrated hard, tuning out the clock. There were muffled cries from somewhere within the room. I peeked my left eye open. Nobody was watching, although the way the family didn't stop grinning made me shiver. I glanced around the room. We were alone. When I turned back towards the circle, Thomas's mom was staring straight at me, her smile practically splitting the seams of her face. Quickly, I shut my eyes, already anxious to go home. The silence seemed to last forever. Finally, the spiritual leader clapped his hands and said we should go out back and toss a ball around. On my way out of the room, I listened for more cries, but the sound had died off. I figured my imagination got the better of me. As Thomas and I tossed a leather ball back and forth in the long grass, his dad watched from a crude decking area, beaming. Like at school, Thomas threw with his right hand, whereas I favored my left. We kept trying to pass each other bad shots, competing to make the other miss a catch. It was all in good fun, though. Thomas acted even weirder than at school. Away from his parents, he at least seemed interested in subjects like TV, but now he strictly spoke about Bible stories and recited his favorite verses. I sidestepped his questions, my spirituality, as much as I could. My arm was aching by the time Mrs. Donovan called us for dinner. In the kitchen, we gathered around the table, and then she brought in a metal pan, presenting 5 boneless chicken breasts lathered in lumpy gravy and canned peaches. Before we ate, everybody linked arms for another prayer, and part of me wished the ritual would never end, because then we'd need to choke down the food. A heavy silence fell over the room. Then those cries started up again, closer than before. It sounded like a child, and their voice had a panicky quality. If it wasn't for the threat of another glare from Thomas's mom, I would have peeked. As the prayer dragged on, the crying became more hysterical, until finally something rattled against the wall behind me. Mr. Donovan's voice raised, thunderous now, and drowned out the sound. I'm not sure which scared me more, but either way my arms broke out in goosebumps. The sermon ended 5 minutes later, and we sat there in silence until the head of the table said, "Amen." I checked the corners for sobbing children, finding only more sheets. What then? A CD player? My imagination? The uncooked chicken made me gag. I didn't want to cause trouble, so I picked around the moldy peaches and spread out the plate so it looked like I'd eaten more than I actually had. There was chocolate cake for dessert, but Thomas's mom went around slicing a piece onto each of our plates, which were still covered with chicken and gravy. By that point my stomach was growling, so I scoffed down a top layer of cake which hadn't touched anything else. I wanted to leave, faking a bellyache. I asked if they would call my mom and have her come pick me up. Thomas's dad raised an eyebrow. No need. We have a special remedy. He told the rest of the family to pray for my health and led me out of the room. The front door was on my left, and I briefly considered making a run for it, but the second I did, Mr. Donovan's hand clamped around my shoulder, tight. His smile never wavered, but something about his eyes made me break out in goosebumps, like an implied threat. So I let him guide me into a vintage bathroom. There was a covered cabinet above the sink, and the tub was already full. A thick layer of scud, plus a few dead flies, floated along the surface. Mr. Donovan poured something into the murky water, salt maybe, and ordered me to strip off my t-shirt so I could dip my midsection in. I told him I'd made a miraculous recovery. Ah, the power of prayer, he said, grinning so wide I could count the back teeth. After that, he announced it was time for bed, despite the fact it wasn't even dark yet. Upstairs, at the very far end of the hall, a huge object spanning the width of both walls was covered by another sheet. We got ushered me into Thomas's room, which was even more dull and lifeless than the rest of the house. A queen-sized bed, one small cupboard, and a single wooden chair tucked in the corner. We needed to share the bed, but only after another round of prayer. Then, it was lights out before 9 o'clock. Alone with my friend, I rolled over and asked what religion his family practiced anyway. He gave the vaguest answers possible, and when I pushed him, became hyper-defensive. So, I said, "Hey, do you ever want to punch Ms. Henry right in her stupid, ugly face?" That made him laugh. Away from his parents, he became more like his school self. Not normal, but closer than before. We argued over who the hottest girl in class was, followed by the most annoying. Without meaning to, I brought up one who always teased him, and it was like all the energy leaked out of my new friend. "I know everybody thinks I'm odd." He sighed. "They just need to get to know you like I did. They'll come around." "You think so?" "Absolutely." He smiled. Then, after a little while, he said, "Hey, want to see something creepy? I'll show you if you think you're brave enough not to wet the bed." I rolled my eyes. He wanted to rattle me, like when we played ball. "Sure. We've got to wait until Mother and Father retire for the night." I kept asking what he had planned, but he wouldn't answer. He got a kick out of keeping me in the dark. I think he waited until the house fell quiet, and then swung his legs out of bed. "This way." In the chilly, dark hall, enough moonlight shone through the windows beside the staircase to see by. As we tiptoed past several closed doors, but crying returned, growing louder as we approached the object beneath the black sheet. Not my imagination then. Facing me, Thomas whispered, "Don't worry if he looks at you. Just make sure you look away fast. You'll be fine so long as you look away fast." Before I could ask what that meant, he crouched down, grabbed the corner of the sheet, and pulled it back, revealing an antique armoire. Suddenly the crying became less muffled. A mirrored panel ran along the bottom section, surrounded by fine, gargoyle-like carvings. Still holding the blanket, Thomas pushed his left ear against the carpet and stared at the glass. "He's there. Come look quick." I just wanted to get this over with. I lay down. For a second I stared at the reflected hall, confused about why we were even there. But then an out-of-place shape caught my eye. I told myself it was my reflection, but then realized I had no reflection. A boy was standing in the corner with his back to us. His shoulders went up and down like he couldn't stop sobbing. "Do you see him?" Thomas asked. I swallowed a gulp, my blood running cold. "Niato." "Huh?" My brain scrambled for an explanation. It was a trick, or a nasty prank. I looked behind me. Nothing, only a bare patch of wall. "He's not there," Thomas said. "Only in the mirror." When I looked back, the boy was much closer and crouched on his side, nose to nose with me. His features were all stretched out, long and narrow like a funhouse mirror, and he had a shock of blonde hair to go with them. His thin lips twisted into a grotesque smile as the boy reached out to me, the tips of his fingers pushing through the glass into reality. I couldn't move a muscle until his face is only inches away from mine, his breath blasting me in the face like a gust of cold air. I scrambled away. If my throat hadn't hitched itself shut, I would have screamed. Quickly, Thomas dropped the sheet and dragged me up by the shoulder, then shoved me down the hall. Behind us, the armoire thrashed from side to side, its hinges squeaking. The boy crying again. Now his voice had an almost hysterical quality. Back in the safety of his room, Thomas pressed his ear against the door until the armoire quietened down. "We are blessed Father didn't hear," he said. "Now we sleep. Father said we aren't to rise before he wakes us to begin the morning ritual." He must not have been the least bit scared by what we saw, because he ushered me into bed and dozed off straight away. But my body wouldn't quit trembling. What was that thing in the mirror? Were there more of them? Is that why they hung sheets everywhere? But why keep any mirrors at all? One thing was for sure, I couldn't spend the night in that house. But Thomas's dad would never let me go. I needed to get the hell out of there without being seen. After Thomas's breathing eased into a rhythm, I swung my legs onto the floor and tiptoed out of the room, toward the stairs. But as I approached the top, footsteps came clomping along. I ducked behind the nearest door. Through the narrow gap, I watched Mr. Donovan march past with a rectangular object tucked beneath his arm. There was a tinkling sound from beneath the sheet. He carried it over to Thomas's room, grunting the whole way, and disappeared through the door. My stomach lurched into my throat. I didn't want to find out what he had planned. I flew down the stairs, carefully, quietly. I kept my hand against the wall for guidance. The front door was locked. My bike still was in the garage. I hoped. But how did I get there from the landing? Above my head, there were angry shouts of, "He's gone!" No time for plans. I sprinted around the ground floor, flying from room to room. Cries rang out in everyone. And now the objects beneath the sheets danced on the walls. Bouncing around, the crying child sounded terrified now, like they were in pain. Past the kitchen, there was a cramped utility room with another door. The temperature plummeted as I bolted through it, into the garage. The light switch was on the inside wall. I flicked it. Then a naked bulb blinked on. Junk was scattered everywhere. Car parts, step ladders, boxes of old newspapers, and more sheets thrown over different mirrors, each flapping and twisting. There were more cries, except not just the boy, and for a second I was afraid to move. But then a door slammed shut behind me, and I ran for it. My bike was propped up against the wall beside the exit, its handlebar stubbornly tangled with a Christmas tree. After a few tugs, it came loose, and it was like setting off a Rube Goldberg machine. A mop and bucket fell into a stepladder, which clattered to the floor and sent a bag of marbles sprawling across the floor, and so on. I grabbed the bike's handlebars. The exit was one of those old fold-up doors you needed to twist the handle to open. My hands were shaking so badly I needed to set the bike aside and focus solely on this task. The door rotated up. Behind me, Thomas's dad burst into the room, and for the first time he'd stopped smiling. He rushed after me but struggled to get through the minefield of junk. My bike's rear wheel became tangled with a sheet, and when I started running it came away like a magician ripping away a tablecloth. I heard the mirror fall the floor and shatter. Laughter rang out, and when I glanced back over my shoulder, bone-thin arms were reaching out of the glass towards Mr. Donovan as the garage light rapidly flicked on and off. "Mr. Donovan screamed. "I will never, as long as I live." Forget the terror in that scream. Pure adrenaline got me out of there. Without slowing down, I sprinted to the top of the driveway and leapt onto the bike and flew down the hill. Behind me, Screams rang out from deeper in the house. I didn't stop to look back. Mom wasn't pleased about me cycling home so late, but I made up an excuse about Thomas's family getting sick and needing to leave in a hurry, so she let it slide. I knew she'd never believe my story. I tried faking an illness to get out of school because I was so anxious about seeing Thomas again, but she was having none of it. I spent all of Saturday and Sunday wondering about what I'd seen. On Monday, my desk buddy sat without breathing a single word. We never spoke again, and we didn't bump elbows once. To my great relief, Ms. Henry announced Thomas's family had moved again the very next day. I never saw him after that, although for a while I had nightmares about his dad dragging me back inside their house, and they tend to flare up any time I see a mirror-fronted armoire. Story 4. The key to knowing Billy. When my husband and I were first presented with the idea that we move in with my grandmother, to say we were less than enthusiastic was an understatement. It's not that I don't love my grandmother or anything, but my husband and I have been married less than a year and want to have a place on our own. However, for financial reasons, while we both get settled into our new jobs, we figured this would be the best option for us. Plus, we'd get to move out of our too small for two people apartment and would be able to take care of my grandmother and keep her company. We moved in about a month ago, and I gotta say, up until a few nights ago, it was going pretty smoothly. My grandmother was loving the company and having the help around the house, and my husband and I have had a lot more privacy than we thought, since we have the whole finished basement to ourselves. Thursday night, though, everything changed. I woke up at around 3 a.m. needing to pee. As I walked back from the bathroom, one of the floorboards beneath my foot came loose, so loose that I could lift it up. I was getting ready to put it back into place and deal with fixing it the next day, when I noticed something under the floorboard. It was a small gold key attached to a keychain that said Billy. I'm not sure why, but I felt this sickening feeling in my stomach as soon as I grabbed it. Still, curiosity got the best of me, and I headed back to our bedroom, stuffing the key in the bedside drawer next to me. At breakfast the next morning, I wanted to see if my grandmother knew anything about the key or Billy. For some reason, my gut was screaming at me to proceed with caution, so I approached the subject softly. "Hey, Grandma, who's Billy?" She put her coffee mug down and took a deep breath. I could feel the tension grow as we sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity. Finally, after what was realistically about 30 seconds, she looked at me with an expression I had never seen from her before. Pure rage. "Where did you hear that name?" she half yelled. Knowing I shouldn't tell her about the key I found, I quickly mumbled, "Oh, I think I heard his name mentioned in one of my mom's childhood stories she was telling me the other day." "Meh," she answered, unconvinced. The anger seemed to have subsided, though, and my grandma walked away from the table to sit outside. Unnerved by my grandmother's reaction to me asking about Billy, I began cleaning. Cleaning is something I do when I'm feeling particularly anxious or afraid. I'm not sure why, but it's soothing. As I ran the broom across the kitchen floor, I heard my grandmother talking outside. I know I should have respected her privacy, but the hushed, rapid tone in which she was speaking piqued my curiosity. I hid myself under the window and listened. "If you didn't tell Lacey about Billy, then where did she hear about him?" A short pause followed while she listened to the person on the other end of the phone, who I assume was my mother, respond. "Well, if she brings it up to you, keep your mouth shut about it. I can't relive that again." Almost immediately after my grandma hung up the phone, my husband walked through the door from work. He had just started working the overnight shift at his job, so him getting home from work at 11 a.m. and spending the rest of the day sleeping before eating and leaving again was our new normal. He saw me crouched under the window and looked at me confused. "Lace, what the hell are you doing?" He laughed. "Shh," motioning to him with my finger in front of my lips. I quickly got up and rushed him into the bedroom. He must have thought I rushed him in there for a different reason, because he had a smirk on his face as I closed the door. Az put his arms around my waist and leaned in to kiss me. I whispered, "I have to tell you something." In a hushed tone, I told him about the key I found and the whole interaction with my grandmother and the phone call I overheard. "Who do you think Billy is?" Jack asked, changing into his pajamas. "I have no idea. But what's with all the secrecy? And what is this a key to? And lace. There's clearly a reason why it's a secret. You heard your grandma. It's too painful to relive. Just let it go." "I guess," I said in a way that didn't convince him or me I would stop looking for answers. Later that night, I was watching TV. Jack was at work and my grandma had gone to bed at like 8 o'clock. I went into my bedroom and opened my bedside drawer. I studied the key, wondering what it opened. I decided I would take advantage of being alone and explore the house. I knew I couldn't go anywhere near my grandmother's room on the 3rd floor because I couldn't risk waking her up. I crept into the laundry room at the far end of the basement and started rummaging through drawers and the linen closet. Nothing. I went into the walk-in closet in the other bedroom in the basement. The light in the closet was busted, so I was using the flashlight on my phone. As I scanned around the closet, I noticed all the way in the back my light was reflecting off of something. The closer I got, the sicker to my stomach I felt. When I finally reached the end of the closet, I saw it. A keyhole. I took a deep breath and wondered if I really wanted to find out what was on the other side. It was as if everything in me was telling me not to do it, but I felt like not knowing would drive me crazy. I put the key into the hole and, to my surprise, it fit. When I opened the door, nothing could have prepared me for what was on the other side. I opened the door in the closet and crouched through the entryway. When I got to the other side, I could barely breathe from the stench of rot. I was in a bedroom, a kid's bedroom that looked like it had not been touched since the 1950s. There were clothes strewn on the bed and the floor, toys scattered throughout the room, and a boy's bed off in the corner. "What the fuck?" I whispered to myself. As I walked further into the room, I noticed some pictures and drawings on the desk. The pictures were of a young boy sitting on a tree swing, smiling widely. I turned the picture over and saw in small writing, "Billy, July 1955. I tucked the picture away in my pocket. I started to get this eerie feeling like someone was watching me. I knew I needed to get the hell out of there. I grabbed a notebook I found on the desk and scurried out of the room, making sure to lock the door behind me. I could swear that as I turned the lock, I could hear a little boy yell, "Don't." Spooked, I quickly made my way back to my bedroom. I was stopped in my tracks by my grandmother standing at the bottom of the stairs. She hadn't seen me, but the enraged look on her face told me she knew something was going on. I had a small, but possible, chance that I could make it to my bedroom without my grandmother seeing me. In that moment, I felt like a child wanting to run and hide under their covers from the scary monster. I slowly got on all fours and as quietly as humanly possible and made my way to the bedroom. By the time I got in there, my grandmother was checking out the laundry room. I quickly made my way into my bed and pulled the sheets over me, pretending to be asleep. After about 5 minutes, I heard my grandmother's slow and heavy footsteps approach my room. I don't know why, but I was scared stiff. My grandmother never scared me before. In fact, I really never saw her angry until I asked about Billy. Slowly, her footsteps approached my bed until they stopped right in front of me, pretending to be asleep. I could feel my grandmother's face inching closer and closer to mine. She was so close that if I opened my eyes, I'm positive my eyelashes would graze her face. I could feel her hot breath on my face, feel the sweat dripping from her forehead. It took everything in me to keep from screaming. My grandmother just stood there, hovering over my face for at least 20 minutes. I know it sounds crazy, but in those 20 minutes I don't think she ever blinked. You might be asking, how would you know if your eyes were closed? But if she could feel my eyelashes if I opened my eyes, wouldn't I feel hers if she closed them? After 20 minutes, that felt like 20 years. I heard my grandmother slowly inch backwards from my bed. I mistakenly thought this terrifying ordeal was over, but I was wrong. My grandmother sat in the chair of the vanity not too far from my bed and sat there watching me until morning. In the morning, I opened my eyes, pretending as if I was just waking up and not silently freaking out with my eyes closed for the last few hours. When I turned to look at the vanity, my grandmother wasn't there. I heard footsteps upstairs and could tell she was in the kitchen. How the hell didn't I hear her leave? I walked up the stairs and into the kitchen. My grandmother was making eggs and had brewed coffee. "Good morning, dear," she sweetly said as she handed me a plate of eggs. "How'd you sleep?" Okay, I guess." She was pretending nothing happened. I certainly wasn't going to bring up last night. As I sat down and began eating my eggs, I could feel my grandmother's eyes on me. I looked up and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My grandmother's eyes, fixated on me, were completely black for a split second before turning back to normal. She still was acting like nothing happened last night. "What is your day like today?" she asked, getting up to put her plate in the dishwasher. "I'm going to run to the store to pick up some clothes for my new job, and then I'm going to do some grocery shopping. Normally I would ask her to come along. Not today, though. I needed out of that house and away from whatever the hell the thing acting like my grandmother was." Instead of going shopping for clothes, I drove to a park outside of town and found a spot under a tree to read the notebook I had found in that bedroom last night. It was Billy's journal. Most of the pages were filled with what he had done that day, drawings and stories. The last 3 pages, however, sent chills down my spine. July 25th, 9:55. Mom and Dad don't believe me. Jane is acting weird. I mean, she's always been weird, but not like this. I told them that in the middle of the night last night, I heard weird noises from Jane's room. When I peeked through the door, she talking to someone in the corner and laughing. She must have felt me there, because she turned around really quick, and I swear her eyes were black for a second. Mom said not to swear if something isn't true, because it's a sin, but I swear I saw her eyes like that. She closed the door in my face, and I ran back to bed. August 11th, 1955. I haven't been feeling too good. Ever since that night, I'm scared to be alone with Jane. No one believes me, but she's getting weirder and weirder. The other day, when Mom and Dad were out at the store, I was playing marbles outside by myself. I heard some rustling coming from the other side of the yard. When I looked up, Jane was running on all fours toward the chicken coop. She had this creepy look on her face, like it was contorted into an evil grin, and her eyes were bloodshot. When she got to the coop, I hid behind the tree and saw Jane pounce into the coop, grab a chicken with her hands, and start eating it alive. My eyes filled with tears, and I felt pee dripping down my leg. Just then my parents' car pulled in front of the house, and Jane's face jerked up. She quickly scampered away, back into the house. When my parents found me, I told them what happened. They didn't believe me and sent me to my room. August 25th, 1955. It's really hard to write because I'm too weak. After Mom and Dad sent me to my room, they locked the door from the outside. Later that night, Mom opened the door to bring me food and some water. She told me I should think about the consequences of lying and closed the door. When Mom locked the door, I heard her gasp and knew she had seen Jane. She told Jane not to creep up on her like that and to go get washed up before bed. Mom repeated herself a few times before I heard her scream out in agony. When my dad came down to check, he met a similar fate. I had backed myself up against the wall and sat there clutching my knees. Slowly, I heard the door creak open. I kept my eyes closed tightly as Jane approached me. She whispered that I needed to learn my lesson, or I'd end up like Mom and Dad. I opened my eyes and Jane was covered in blood. She had this deranged smile on her face, and her eyes stayed open and wide as she backed away out of the room. Before she closed the door, she stared at me and let out a cackle, never once changing her facial expression or closing her eyes. I've been in here for a long time. I think at least 2 weeks. I'm hungry. I don't think I can go on much longer. The journal ended there. I quickly called my mom and asked her about Billy. Why did he describe Grandma like that? Why didn't anyone ever mention she had a brother? You told me Grandma's parents died in a car accident when she was 13. Leave it alone, Lacey. I'm serious. I don't want to talk about it. Just don't let Grandma know you know anything more than his name, she said before hanging up. I rushed home and woke up my husband. I whispered to him that he needed to leave and go to a friend's house or something. He had so many questions, but I told him he needed to go now. I didn't want to drag him further into this. My husband, usually one to be logical, saw the fear in my eyes and quickly was out the door. I followed him upstairs and saw my grandmother in the yard gardening. I called out to her that I was going to go grocery shopping a little later, but decided to come back home and take a nap first. "Okay, sweetie," she waved. I went downstairs, locking the door behind me. I quickly grabbed the key out of my pocket and made my way back to the room in the closet. When I got into the bedroom, I started looking for any clues as to what happened to Billy. I was overcome with that same putrid smell of rot as I searched through the room. I opened a toy chest that sat at the foot of the bed and immediately gagged. Inside was a skeleton of a child, dressed in the same clothes Billy was wearing in the picture. As I reached for my cell phone to call the police, I heard the door to the room slam behind me. At the door stood my grandmother. She looked at me, eyes filled with rage. Instead of yelling, she laughed. She laughed, and laughed, and laughed with that same expression Billy described. "If only you had listened to me, you little bitch. You know why your mom is so scared of me? 'Cause when she was little, if she misbehaved, I'd lock her in the room with Billy. I thought we should have done the same to you since you were such a little brat growing up. But your mother made me promise I'd never do that. I promised not to. If she promised never to bring up Billy, no need to bring up old news. But you had to be a little nosy. Rotten bitch." She was right in front of me now. Her face was inches from mine, staring at me with her black, soulless eyes and a face that no longer resembled my grandmother's. We stood in silence like that for a few seconds before I tried to run. I felt my grandmother's hand grab onto my arm, and I turned around. She suddenly looked like my grandmother again. "Oh, dear, this is your home now." My grandmother crawled toward the door, contorting her body in unhuman ways as she moved. She looked back at me and I shrieked in horror. She had my face now, my body, and my voice. She laughed once more and closed the door behind her. Now, I'm stuck in this room, a room I wish I never found. I need to find a way out. Story 4. An investigation into think tech. A cry for help. This may not be reality. I may be posting this to the abyss or not at all. Is this a cry for help, or all part of a greater plan larger than I can comprehend? My mind is rattled. It has been undone. This world is built on secrets, and I was one of the few who made a living uncovering them. My name is irrelevant now, but for years I've been a private investigator, priding myself on discretion and efficiency. I have lived a secluded life. The connections I have made have been fleeting at best. It's easy to be pessimistic and untrustworthy of people with what I have seen and uncovered in my time. Nothing could have prepared me for the nightmare I stumbled into at ThinkTech. As I try to piece together the fragments of my memory, I can't shake the feeling that some of what I remember might not be my own. ThinkTech stood as a fortress of innovation, its public face a beacon of hope for Alzheimer's and dementia patients. Commissioned by an anonymous employer, my mission was to delve into their brain imaging and altering technology. The deeper I dug, the more sinister the rumors became. Whispers of mind control, secret experiments, and people who vanished without a trace. I knew I needed to get in to truly uncover their secrets. My entry into ThinkTech was facilitated not by subterfuge, but an invitation under the guise of a journalist, an aspiring writer in the medical technology field, ready to sing ThinkTech's praises. Of course, this would be of interest to the shareholders. The facility was a shrine to ThinkTech's triumphs, with portraits of beaming scientists and heartfelt accounts of miraculous recoveries. Yet, there was something off in the way the staff moved and interacted, an undercurrent of dread that intuition whispered to me. The hallways didn't evoke a feeling of positivity or optimism from patients being treated, just a feeling that this was all a mere plastic facade ready to be torn down, exposing the hidden truths. Staff continued to move in a hush-hush manner, avoiding my gaze as I was shown around the sterile facility. In my research, Dr. Emily Carter emerged as a person of interest, a neuroscientist celebrated for her breakthroughs, yet enshrouded in mystery. No backstory, no origin, as if she appeared out of thin air. It took some digging, but I discovered she was deeply involved in classified projects. I knew I needed to talk to her, try and get her to reveal things not known. As I was being shown around the facility, I was introduced to a few of the scientists working on the many projects under ThinkTech's umbrella. Amongst them, Dr. Emily Carter. For such a decorated scientist, she was very quiet and subdued. She was successfully avoiding my not-so-subtle gaze, and my attempts to grab her attention were proving futile. Pulling myself away from the obviously meticulously planned PR spiel of the numerous scientists, I walked towards Dr. Carter. Before I could get a word out, her eyes darted to the corners of the room, pointing out the multitude of cameras following everyone's every move. It was clear that I wouldn't be able to get any information out of her here. I extended a handshake and smiled. She reciprocated the action. With a bead of sweat appearing in her forehead, she uttered the words, "Hillside View," after which she turned and left. I was taken aback at first, caught off guard, confused. When I started to ponder on the words "Hillside View," I was reminded of a case of mine from many years ago, of an insurance scam gone wrong. A hotel was burnt down with families stuck inside. The owner of the hotel couldn't afford to keep the hotel in good condition, its floors warped and twisted, hallways in various states of disrepair. He burnt it down to get a new start, one that never came. All that is left of the Hillside View Hotel is a charred mass of wood and bricks. The doorway to the lobby still stands, almost in defiance of what the owner chose to do. What could Dr. Carter possibly have meant by this? Was it linked to ThinkTech? Was it a warning? Could it possibly be an opportunity to meet? Hoping it was the latter, I knew I needed to pay the Hillside View Hotel a visit. I pulled up to the hotel in my car. It appeared dark, a black mass imposing against the already night sky. I sat in my car wondering why I was here. How did Dr. Carter know this place was linked to me? How was she able to see through my journalist identity? Before I could comprehend what was happening, a shrouded figure opened my car's back door, sat down and closed the door behind them. I didn't dare look back, not wanting to catch a bullet to the head. I waited. I waited for the figure to speak, to shed some light on my current situation. I waited. Looking in the rear view, I caught a glimpse of their silhouette, appearing almost familiar but shrouded in darkness. "You don't know what you're getting into," she whispered. "You don't know how far this goes. You might not come back," a tremble in her voice. Extending out of the dark, a hand appeared, holding out a key card and an address. It appeared glinting in the moonlight, a gateway to the next chapter. I took the items and inspected them. Before I could say anything, the figure was gone, fleeing into the night. I debated on what my next move should be, pondering my safety. However, my drive to seek out the unknown forever pulls me deeper into the darkness. Following the address, it brought me to some woods on the outskirts of the city, illuminated only by the glow of the night sky. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, guiding my car deeper into the dense woods. Not knowing what lied ahead, the trees loomed like sentinels, their gnarled branches intertwining above to form a claustrophobic canopy that blotted out what little light there was. The air grew heavier, and the forest seemed to swallow the gravel road, each turn leading me further from the world I knew. The address scribbled on a piece of paper sat on the passenger seat. A cryptic beacon given to me by a shrouded figure outside a part of my career from many years ago. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was driving into a trap, the sinister atmosphere mirroring a dark chapter from my past. Years ago, I had navigated through a different kind of darkness. I spiraled into a void where the days blurred together in a haze of grief and self-destruction. I repressed the source of this pain to allow me to keep going, to allow me to uncover the treachery of the world as repentance for my previous lack of action. The suffocating forest now felt like an echo of those days, each tree a reminder of the walls I had built around myself. I feel now a familiar sense of dread, an abyss threatening to engulf me. The memories of sleepless nights and relentless self-reproach surged back with every mile. intertwining with the present danger. Yet, just as I clawed his way out of that personal hell, I knew I had to confront whatever lay ahead, hoping this journey into the shadows would bring me one step closer to salvation. As I emerged into the forest clearing, the sight before me was nothing short of surreal. In the midst of the dense, wild underbrush and towering trees, a solitary door stood erect, untouched by time or nature. The clearing itself was unnaturally circular, the surrounding trees bending away as if repelled by some unseen force emanating from the door. There were small walls either side, indication of a staircase being just beyond the door, its surface polished and pristine, unnaturally so. The door's presence was profoundly eerie, a stark contrast to the raw, untamed forest. It stood as an anomaly, an element so out of place that it twisted the fabric of reality around it. A cold breeze whispered through the clearing, rustling leaves and carrying with it a faint, almost inaudible hum that set me on edge. The door's handle gleamed, seemingly inviting, yet menacing. I felt a chill creep up my spine, as if the very air around him held its breath, waiting for him to make a move, watching. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but an inexplicable pull drew me closer, compelling me to face whatever mystery lay beyond the uncanny threshold. Inside the door was a long, narrow staircase descending deep into the darkness, an unsettling invitation into ThinkTech's inner sanctum. The contrast was jarring. One moment I was surrounded by the organic, chaotic life of the forest, and the next, I was staring into a passage that seemed to defy the natural order. The staircase was made of cold steel, each step sharp and perfect, almost as if I was the first person to ever come across this place. Bright, shimmering lights lined the walls at precise intervals, casting ghostly shadows that danced in the periphery of my vision. The air that wafted up from below was damp and musty, carrying the scent of earth and something else, something metallic and unsettling. With each step I took, the walls seemed to close in tighter, the oppressive silence broken only by the echo of my footsteps. The narrowness of the staircase amplified my unease, making me feel as though I was descending into the bowels of the earth, towards an unseen presence, a malevolent force waiting at the end of my journey. Yet I continued downward, each step a reluctant but necessary advance into the unknown. Finally reaching the bottom of the stairwell, I was enveloped by a silence so profound it felt suffocating, each breath a struggle against the oppressive stillness. Turning back around to look up at the staircase I had just descended, the world felt impossibly far away. In contrast to the staircase, this room was not well lit, lit up only by the glow of the staircase. Shadows pressed in from all sides, thick and impenetrable, as if the darkness itself were alive, conspiring to swallow me whole. I moved forward cautiously, my footsteps echoing in the eerie void, until I stumbled upon a gallery that sent a chill through my bones. Lining the walls were photographs of missing persons, faces frozen in time, eyes wide with terror and desperation. It was immediately clear that these were captives, not volunteers. The name Project Mind's Eye was scrawled ominously across a large, decrepit sign hanging crookedly on the wall. My stomach churned as I realized the true horror of this place. Project Mind's Eye was not merely for observation, but for control. In the dim light, I could make out grotesque diagrams pinned to the walls, showing devices implanted in the subjects' skulls. These crude contraptions were designed to strip individuals of their autonomy, turning them into mere puppets for some sinister purpose. The cold, clinical nature of the setting clashed horribly with the reality of the human suffering it inflicted. My mind raced, the enormity of the revelation crashing over me like a wave. Each photograph, each diagram, each desperate face etched into my memory as I stood there, a lone witness to the depths of human depravity. As I documented this horror, the realization struck me. ThinkTech was expecting me. My every move had been orchestrated. They didn't need to hunt me down. They knew where I was at every moment. The door was opened, not to pursuers, but to guide me and others potentially like me deeper into the dark. A symphony of mechanical hums filled the air, the source elusive yet omnipresent. I felt rooted to the spot, a silent observer to unseen horrors. A door creaked open at the end of the room, its ominous presence beckoning me to uncover what lay beyond. But as I stood there, staring into the gaping maw of further darkness, my usual controlled disposition faltered. The weight of the photographs and diagrams, the faces of the missing and tormented, pressed heavily on my psyche. Fear surged through me, raw and unrelenting, eroding my resolve. My instinct for self-preservation screamed louder than my curiosity. I could feel the icy tendrils of dread creeping up my spine, tightening their grip around my heart. With a shaky breath, I made the decision to retreat. Each step backward a surrender to the overwhelming terror that had seized me. The suffocating silence, the oppressive shadows, and the horrific revelations of Project Mind's Eye were too much to bear. As I turned away from the open door, I could only hope that retreating now would give me the strength to return and face this nightmare another day. My escape was a calculated retreat, not a desperate flight. For days, I didn't leave my apartment, trying to piece together what I had witnessed. What was their plan? How far had they spread? The feeling of being watched was an unshakable companion. I couldn't shake the unease that had settled in my bones. The shadows outside seemed to thicken and become larger with every night that passed, taking on a life of their own. From my window, I noticed them lurking on the streets below, their indistinct forms blending seamlessly with the darkness. They stood still, their presence ominous and foreboding, as if they were waiting for the right moment to strike. I pulled the curtains, hoping to shut out the unnerving sight, but the sense of being watched persisted. Moving through my apartment, I could almost feel these shadowy figures within the complex itself, lingering just beyond my door in the hallways, their vague silhouettes flickering in the dim light. Every creak and rustle seemed amplified, my senses on high alert as paranoia gnawed at me. The walls of my sanctuary felt increasingly thin, unable to keep out the creeping dread that these figures brought with them. It was clear that whatever dark forces I had encountered in the forest had followed me home, and there was no escaping their watchful eyes. These shadowy figures affirmed ThinkTech's awareness of my investigation. The final confrontation was not violent, but a quiet breach of my sanctuary through the front door in the dead of night. In the pitch black, there was a presence. Dr. Carter stood before me with a group of men, quiet and with blank expressions. "We are only trying to help," she pleaded, her voice a siren's call, beckoning for my compliance. "This is not down to us, but to those that can't be seen. Just as I stretched out my hand to you to bring you in, they stretched out theirs to bring us in." A laptop was presented to me, the only file on it a video titled Patient Eye. My fingers hesitated over the keyboard before double-clicking the icon. The footage, grainy and unfocused, showed a woman strapped to a chair, electrodes attached to her head. The room was dimly lit, but had a sense of familiarity to it, evoking a feeling I had a few nights before. Had this been what lay beyond the door that I turned away from? The video played, revealing the woman's face wide with terror, her body convulsing as she struggled against the restraints. Her screams echoed through the speakers, piercing and desperate. "Where am I? Who are you?" Her pleas remained unanswered. A scientist stepped towards the center of the room. "The time is 1900 hours on the 10th of March 2004. We are here with Patient I, Emily. Emily has struggled through the foster system due to her mental health. Emily has displayed signs of childhood dementia. She has trouble concentrating, understanding, learning and communicating, frequent personality changes, severely disturbed sleep and behavioral issues such as hyperactivity. She is the perfect test subject to test out our new treatment." From this video, it was clear ThinkTech was providing this treatment without proper permission or authority. Pursuing progress, no matter the cost. The video continues with the scientist explaining the procedure. "Our treatment seeks to implant a device into the patient's brain. We will be stimulating it after insertion with an electronic pulse provided by the electrodes around the patient's head. This will activate said device to act as a bridge between various sections of the brain, allowing information to be stored and transferred on demand. A second brain, if you will. Dementia patients will no longer have to rely on the fragility of their own organic structures. The device will pick up every impulse sent through it. "What do you want with me?" the child screamed, holding back tears. The chilling intensity of her voice sending shivers up my spine. I could see the raw fear etched into her features, her gaze darting around the room as if trying to escape the horrors of the reality she was in. A new figure stepped into the frame, a much older man. His expression was one of cold, clinical detachment, a stark contrast to the girl's frantic terror. He glanced at the monitors, then at his team, his voice calm and commanding. "Initiate the sequence," he ordered. Not one person flinched or stalled for even a moment, beginning the sequence in synchronous harmony, like drones, no sign of unease or uncertainty that they might not be right. The girl's screams intensified for a moment, then morphed into a monotonous drone. Her eyes glazing over, she fell silent. Even from the video, the silence in the room was palpable. It was as if time had stopped, everyone waiting for the child to speak and show signs of life. "I'm not alone in here anymore, am I?" Her voice, now void of emotion, repeated the haunting refrain like a broken record. The room around her seemed to pulse with a dark energy, the shadows on the grainy footage appearing to shift and writhe as if alive. The older man watched impassively, taking notes as the girl's words grew increasingly disjointed, her mind fracturing under the relentless pressure. "They are in my head. They control me. They are telling me things. They want more." The camera zoomed in on her face, capturing every twitch and spasm, every flicker of madness that crossed her eyes. Her transformation from a terrified human to a hollow shell was recorded in excruciating detail. The video ended abruptly, the screen going black, leaving me in a silence that felt louder than the screams. My heart pounded in my chest, and a cold sweat clung to my skin. The shadows in my apartment seemed to stretch and lengthen, the memory of the girl's tortured cries echoing in my mind. Who are they? What did she mean by, "I'm not alone in here anymore, am I?" All these questions raced through my mind. I briefly forgot I was in my room surrounded by ThinkTech's personnel. Then it clicked. The child, Emily, Doctor. Carter watched as the realization came to my face. Too stunned to speak, Doctor. Carter filled the air not with her quiet and frightened voice that she had presented previously, but one similar to the cold and clinical nature of the older man in the video. "I wouldn't be where I am today without them. They made me who I am. You only need to let them in." In that moment, be it clarity or madness, I grasped ThinkTech's true horror. They had not merely unlocked minds, they had opened doors to realms unfathomable, and within those depths lurked unseen powers. I was left with the question of how much of Emily is truly left. Is her body merely acting as a conduit for whatever them is, or is she still in there, with no control of the wheel, witnessing whatever horrors she has been made to watch in the last 20 years? I was told what to do, how to fix people, rid people of their pain, bring people's loved ones back from the brink. Can't you see that? I know what happened to you. Don't you want rid of those memories? The pain? Doctor, Carter beckoned to me. The horror of ThinkTech's true intentions began to hit me. The anonymous company that had hired me was ThinkTech itself. They sought out reclusive individuals like myself, those who had been through hardship, knowing no one would come looking when we vanished or changed beyond recognition. I was just a pawn in a game repeated many times before. ThinkTech slowly amassing an army of meat puppets. Do ThinkTech even know what they are doing, or have they collectively lost control, being controlled by an invisible entity or entities? The shadows in my room began to get longer and darker, enveloping all that is around me. A sudden dizziness washed over me, and I stumbled backward, feeling as though the ground had shifted beneath my feet. When I regained my bearings, I found myself sitting alone in the very same dimly lit room from the tape. I was disoriented and afraid. The same metallic smell and hum was present from before. I knew there was no point screaming out for help. I was truly alone. No one could possibly help me. I began to feel a tingling sensation in the back of my head. It was as if I could feel another presence in my mind, a sinister consciousness lurking just beyond the edges of my awareness. At first, it was just whispers, faint echoes that seemed to emanate from the depths of my own thoughts. But as I struggled to make sense of the situation, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they became a cacophony of voices, each one vying for control. I could feel them rifling through my memories, rewriting them, twisting them into something unrecognizable. Panic surged within me as I realized that I was no longer alone inside my own head. I tried to fight back, to assert my own will, but it was like trying to hold back a tidal wave with my bare hands. The presence in my mind was relentless, a puppeteer pulling at the strings of my consciousness with chilling precision. Every thought, every action was no longer my own. It was dictated by the unseen force that now held sway over me. I watched in horror as my body attempted to move of its own accord, like a marionette on strings, carrying out commands that I couldn't even comprehend. It was as if I were a prisoner in my own mind, forced to witness the unfolding nightmare from behind a veil of helplessness. And as the realization sank in that I was no longer in control, that I was nothing more than a vessel for this malevolent force, I knew that there was no escape. I was trapped, bound to this entity that now inhabited my mind. What was its goal? What was its purpose? Before I could work this out, I was thrust back into the darkness, encased within the walls of my head, a space that seemed to close in with malevolent intent. An infinite darkness. I was faced with the ultimate violation, not of home or privacy, but of self. In this new reality where consciousness could be commandeered, the terror lay in discerning what remained truly mine. Dr. Carter's voice, so cold and detached, echoed in my mind. I was told what to do, how to fix people, rid people of their pain. How many people are not who they seem? How many people have been changed? Think tech are creating conduits for something beyond our comprehension to peer through, no longer watching us but taking control. I awoke in my apartment, sat at my desk. I knew I had to expose them, to warn the world. But as I sat in my dimly lit study, paranoia wrapped around me like a vice. Every shadow seemed to hide a pair of watching eyes. Every sound a whisper of something unseen. My own thoughts no longer felt like my own. In the end, it wasn't the fear of what think tech could do to my body that paralyzed me. It was the knowledge that they had already claimed my mind. The true horror of think tech was not just in their experiments, but in the realization that I might never know which of my thoughts were truly mine and which were theirs. Everything I see and do can be altered, changed, generated. For all I know, I'm stuck inside my own mind prison, being placated by them, by being allowed to write this out, never to be seen by a soul, only existing within the bounds of my head. As I type this, I feel myself further falling into paranoia and madness. I'm unsure if these are my words or theirs. Is this a warning, or a trap laid by them? I share this, not knowing if it's a desperate attempt by what's left of myself to reach out, or if it's think tech using me to spread their influence further. To whoever reads this, beware. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. Story 5. I was trapped in a pitch-black room. It turned out I was part of a horrifying experiment. A few weeks ago, I woke up in hell. I know this might sound dramatic, but once you'd been in my shoes, you would have thought the same thing. I really hope you never have to endure even a fraction of what I had experienced. I'm currently in a hiding spot and away from any real danger, so I thought it was the ideal time to write down the past weeks, in hope someone can understand my situation. Last month, I woke up lying on a cold concrete floor, my head pounding like an elephant had trampled on it, and I felt like I was barely wearing anything. My hands only felt a skimpy patient gown. It smelled horribly of excrement, which someone had tried to conceal with disinfectant instead of washing the gown thoroughly. I sat up and screamed in panic as everything went black. I really thought I was blind at that moment until my vision cleared and I could see a bright crack under the door. I was in a room with no lights. I leaned over the gap and tried to see anything that would tell me where I was. Because I had no idea how I got here, my memories went back to a time when I was sitting calmly in a diner, my girlfriend Flo and her little brother Benny across from me. That was all I knew. But wherever I was, I didn't belong here. Not a single soul deserved to be here. Through the gap, I could see a lit corridor surrounded by several dark doors. Mine was one of them. Had I been accidentally locked up in a prison or a mental institution? That couldn't be possible. In my whole life, I've only had several bouts of depression like any person in their 20s and frequent sleep problems. But I've never been the kind of person who bangs their head against walls or plucks out their hair in a manic episode. After spending the next 2 or 3 hours, I completely lost track of time, calling for help and exploring the empty room. I suddenly heard a voice coming from the other side of the room. It was a deep, male voice with a croaking aftertone. Screaming won't do you any good. Brother, it'll just ruin your vocal cords. Then everyone's gonna think you're a chain smoker. I couldn't believe my ears. My panic and despair dropped by half when I heard his voice. It was the first time since I woke up that I found some sense of normality in my terrible situation. "Who are you?" I said out loud, pressing my head against the wall, hoping he would answer and confirm that I wasn't imagining him. "I'm locked up here just like you." "Brother," I heard him smirk. "How long?" I asked. "Maybe a few days. It could be a few weeks or months. I bet even you don't know how long you've been here." How right he was. He seemed very confident and relaxed as he spoke, which made me think he had probably spent a long time here. "Do you know where we are?" "Definitely not the Radisson Blu. I think they're keeping us here for some sick experiment." I swallowed loudly when I heard the word experiments. I've read many books and seen many films where people were involuntarily or voluntarily put in situations where their psyche was put to the test. I think one of those works was about the Stanford prison experiment or something like that, but I knew it was based on true events. In any case, I shuddered at the thought that I could possibly be part of a human experiment. Given the conditions I had to spend time in, I suspected the worst. "What kind of experiment could this be?" I asked my neighbor. "I don't know. They haven't done anything to me yet. At least I don't think so." I waited, spellbound. When I sleep, I often have nightmares about people in protective suits poking around on my body. It always feels so real and painful, but dreams are always real, right? And every time I wake up, I feel around my body and find nothing. I think I'm going crazy. "Brother, but doesn't anyone come to feed us? You can't be here the whole time without eating or drinking anything." "Only when I'm falling asleep. They put a tray in the room, right next to the crack in the door so I can see it. On the tray is always the same disgusting food. A dry piece of white bread, a spoonful of porridge and a piece of fruit, usually a couple of slices of pear that are really mushy, and a cupful of water. Then you always have to push the tray through the crack at the end. Only think about leaving the tray with you and you can bite the dust." I sank to the ground and listened to his words with a mixture of despair and hopelessness. I didn't know what would happen to me if I kept doing what my neighbor had been doing the entire time, sitting in the dark forever, losing track of time, eating only the bare minimum to avoid starving, slowly but surely going mad and not getting any answers. "We'll definitely find a way out," I said determinedly. "They can't just keep us here like this and never let us out. At the first chance we can..." "I've tried everything." "Brother, I'm sorry I gotta take away all your hope, but we're at their mercy. The only way out of here is to not touch the tray and just go to sleep." His words hurt my soul. Fear rose up inside me again. "Have you tried?" I asked cautiously. Like I said, I've tried everything, but the survival instinct can be a real asshole. I don't know why, but the way he expressed his words was the height of the blackest humor and didn't fit my current state of mind at all. So I just had to laugh. I laughed so loudly and ugly that I couldn't stop. In the distance, I heard my neighbor laughing as well, which only made the whole thing worse. I laughed like I've never laughed before in my life. Suddenly, I was reminded of the diner, my last known memory before I woke up here. In the memory, I saw myself laughing too, Flo and Benny joining in. It was like a Bill Burr stand-up show. I really enjoyed the moment, and I think my neighbor was glad that he hadn't lost his laughter after all this time. The two of us kept talking for a few more hours. Most of the time, we talked less about our precarious situation and more about things from our lives outside the room. I told him about Flo, how I met her and how we spent our time at college together before I dropped out. I also told him about my brother Charlie, who I lost in a car accident. As I talked about him, I realized how the pain of losing him hurt way more than anything that had happened to me since I woke up in the room, or that I feared could happen in the future. Nothing came even close to the gravity of his death. I loved Charlie more than anything. My neighbor listened carefully and then told me a bit about himself. How he dropped out of school at the age of 15 in order to work and support his sick mother. She suffered from multiple sclerosis and only made it until he turned 20. He then slipped into drug addiction and, in his words, spent the last 5 years simply cracking up. It went on like this until he announced that he wanted to sleep. "You should lie down too, brother," he said sleepily. "Especially when you're hungry. They don't let anything inside till you're dozed off." I was about to tell him that I didn't feel like sleeping at all, but then I heard snoring from next door. I lay down on the hard floor and cursed those who hadn't even thought about putting a mattress or at least a pillow in there. I didn't like doing it, but if I wanted to at least try to sleep, I just had to. I took off my gown so that I was stark naked and folded it into a pillow, which I put under my head. I'm always very picky about my pillows, because for me, that's the most important material for a safe sleep. At home, I could only sleep on an orthopedic neck pillow. My sleeping issues could sometimes be that bad. I lay on my back and stared at the ceiling, which could also be the wall, an endless darkness without any light or warmth. My neighbor appeared in front of me. I heard his voice, which had probably become so croaky from all the screaming, and I imagined what he might look like. I imagined how we would have crossed paths in another life, both of us at our lowest point and each other's support. I would help him with his withdrawal, and we would become best friends. Flo and her brother Benny appeared in front of me, sitting in the diner. Each of us was drinking a chocolate milkshake. Benny wasn't taking the ice cream very well, as he was holding his head and waiting for the brain freeze to wear off. I laughed at his funny expression, but Flo suddenly slapped me on the shoulder, looking all worried. She stammered something I couldn't hear. She took Benny in her arms. He looked very strange now, as if he was about to throw up at any moment. For some reason, I still found this amusing, and I continued to laugh while Flo cried and held Benny close. Benny threw up something that didn't look like food or any other substance resembling puke. It looked like a turquoise and slippery tentacle. The suction cups looked at me like eyes and were so irregularly shaped that any trypophobic person would gag at the sight of it. The tentacle hung motionless in the air. Benny was choking with every second. Flo was sobbing and her eyes were getting redder and redder. My vocal cords were still only emitting laughter. A fat waitress suddenly appeared next to me and, completely disregarding the circumstances, placed a tray in front of me. On it was a dry piece of white bread, the smallest pile of porridge, a banana full of brown spots that I hate, and a cup full of water. The diner's lights went out as quickly as they had appeared. Flo, Benny and the tentacle disappeared from my sight, and my laughter stopped. I was back in the dark room where I had woken up today, or yesterday, or the day before, with no memories. Only the room was no longer as pitch black as usual, but faded into a greyish light emanating from the side of the door. My eyes rolled towards the door, where a pair of arms wrapped in latex gloves held a tray in their hands and carefully placed it on the floor. As he leaned forward, I dimly recognized that he was wearing a decontamination suit. As I became more awake and my mind clearer, I found myself faced with a grave dilemma. If I simply stood up and lunged at him, I would have a chance to get out of this place. But if I remained in this position and gave the impression that I was asleep, the man in the suit would leave me here alone with the gross food, and I would have to hope for another attempt, if it ever came. As the man in the suit pushed the tray towards me, he looked at me and our eyes met, even though I was just staring into a gas mask with integrated eye protection. The man backed away and pulled out a walkie-talkie. I wasn't sure what he was saying because he was stammering so much, but it was obvious that he caught me awake. I looked at his legs and saw that he was shaking. He was scared. At that moment, I didn't care what he was so scared of. Though, I wanted to take advantage of every chance I had. I got up from the floor and slowly staggered towards him, making the most disturbing expression on my face. The man walked backwards until he reached the wall and was at my mercy. The grey light completely surrounded me now, and I felt like I could see colours for the first time in years. I grabbed the man by his suit and shoved him into the room. His whole body was trembling. I looked him up and down. "Give me your suit," I said, mock croaking. He didn't hesitate and took off his green overalls and gas mask, until in the end, there was only a lanky boy in his underwear. He looked barely older than 20. He was sweating all over, and I could see a small yellow puddle on his feet. Poor bastard. I put on the hazmat suit, the gas mask and his rubber boots. In the suit pockets, I found the key to the room. Before I closed the door behind the boy, I said, "You'll be out of here soon." I would have liked to take more care of him, but he wasn't the one who was trapped here. I first went past my neighbor's door and knocked quietly. He didn't make a sound. I asked him if he was awake and could answer me. No response. I pressed my ear against the door and only heard his snoring. I tried to open the door with the key, but it didn't click. There was probably an individual key for each door in the hallway. I quickly whispered to him that I would be back soon and went down the hallway. It really felt like mental institution. There were the same dark steel doors on each side of the hallway. The floor was completely covered in concrete, and several fluorescent lights flickered on the ceiling. At the end of the hallway, I passed some empty hospital beds and cleaning equipment. I walked through a maze of more hallways made of nothing but walls until I finally found a slightly open door from which strange noises were coming. I heard people mumbling, squeaking boots and clinking metal cutlery. I got closer and closer to the door until I could understand some things more clearly. A man and a woman were discussing something excitedly. "His numbers are dropping. We need to do it now. Do you really want to risk the possibility that he could be dangerous if you cut him open?" It worked with the last anomaly before it died. That was different. That anomaly was 58 years old and suffered from heart problems. We're dealing with a much younger specimen here, who is also still going through puberty. "How long have you been doing this job? Have you ever been down the other hallways and looked at these creatures? Every day I have to bring this filthy food to the worst kinds of humanity and look at their faces. They may look different on the outside, older, younger, taller, shorter, or sicker and healthier, but at the core they're all the same. We are only doing them a favor." There was silence after that, which made me think that the woman had given in. Curiously, I dared to look into the room, as inconspicuously as possible. Another man in a hazmat suit and a woman in a gas mask and surgical gown were bent over a hospital bed. The woman took a scalpel and worked on the body of the person who was lying motionless on the bed. I leaned closer to get a better look, when suddenly the hinges of the door squeaked and exposed me. The man in the suit looked at me in surprise, but the woman seemed to have been startled by the noise because she frantically cut into the patient's chest before turning around too. The patient suddenly woke up and screamed loudly, his chest heaving. At that moment I realized it was a little boy. He had curly hair and green eyes and loved chocolate ice cream more than anything. It was Benny. The man in the suit acted quickly and pulled out a knife and approached Benny. I lunged at him and knocked it out of his hand. We struggled for a while, with him having the upper hand. He was very strong and punched me pretty hard, but I fought back as much as I could. I did everything to stop him from picking up that knife again. Meanwhile, Benny got up from the bed, still screaming and his chest bulging out. His screaming suddenly turned into a terrible wheezing sound, as if he was about to vomit his intestines out at any moment. The woman in the surgical gown approached him cautiously, but before she could do anything, Benny knocked her out of the way with full force, leaving her lying motionless on the floor. I was still fighting with the man, but finally managed to grab him under the nose and push it up, causing him to release me from his handle in pain. I quickly ran to Benny, although I didn't know what to do. "Benny." "It's me!" I shouted, hoping he would recognize me, but the sight of him told me that I was standing in front of something completely different from Benny. I would only recognize this creature in my worst dreams. Benny's wheezing got louder, and eventually gigantic, turquoise and slippery tentacles sprouted from his mouth, chest and eyes. I was frozen and didn't know how to feel. I knew that creature wasn't Benny. I knew I'd seen it in my dream. I knew it was real, and I knew it was my fault. Its suction cups stared at me again, uneven and disgusting. Before I knew it, it reached out and sucked itself onto me. The pressure was so strong that I felt like I was being sucked into a deep black hole, even blacker than the darkness it had to endure in the room. Story 6. Their eyes are changing. This all started about a week ago. Please hear me out. I need your help. I need help! Please don't write me off as crazy. I'm not! Just over a week ago. It was an average Sunday. I was talking to my girlfriend, Lucille, on our couch, watching TV, when I realized something was off. It was her eyes. Her eyes had never been green before. I always loved how her brown eyes complemented her chestnut hair and her fair skin, yet here she was with green eyes. When I noticed, I must have made a weird face because she stopped our chat about the show we had been watching and leaned in, almost close enough to feel her breath hit my face. She gave a small smirk and asked me, "Is everything all right? You look concerned." I closed my eyes, hoping it was some sort of visual illusion, and shook my head, and before I looked at her again, I responded swiftly, No, it's all right. It looked like your eyes were green instead of brown. It's weird, I just must have seen it wrong or something." When I finally looked up at her, she was turned away from me. I couldn't see what she was doing, but her hand was up by her face, and she had a soft chuckle before replying, "Well, obviously you must have seen wrong. We all know my eyes are brown, right?" She chuckled a bit more and she looked back at me with brown eyes, but it all felt off. The rest of the night was normal, but that moment lingered in the back of my mind. Not that her eyes were green as much as how odd her response was. We watched a few more episodes of the show, with Lucille's head leaned on my shoulder, arm wrapped around the back of my neck, and hand extended onto my other shoulder before we went to bed. I guess I should have found it odd, but the whole rest of the night she did not let me leave her sight. It wasn't concerning to me at the time because she kept trying to keep a conversation going, but honestly, it is a bit weird when I go to take a leak and I feel her eyes pierce the back of my head. As we went to bed, I stared at the ceiling considering the events before eventually passing out. The next few days were just as ordinary as ever. God, I wish that was the case for every day of the past week and a half. But on Friday, another weird occurrence happened. It was right before we were leaving for our date. I'd placed my phone down next to her purse in the middle of the coffee table before I went to the bathroom quickly. Now I know I had passed by my girlfriend in the foyer before I made it to the bathroom in the hallway. Now, I know this was not very gentlemanly, but I had peed with the door open, so I would have seen her pass by me, so I can confirm she didn't just walk there. But by the time I left the bathroom, there she was in the entryway of our bedroom at the opposite end of the hallway from where the foyer was. I actually jumped back a bit, she scared me so much. She laughed a little before asking once again, "Is everything all right? You look scared." I was dazed at the moment, but I quickly found my footing and voice rumbling deep in my throat. "Yeah, I might sound crazy, but you were just in the foyer." "Ha! I sound crazy saying it, but you were just there in the foyer. How the hell did you end up there?" As the words left my mouth, there was no gain in confidence, especially when she responded, "I don't know that you should be driving tonight. Got yourself in the wrong frame of mind, because I was standing here when you were walking to the bathroom. I waved to you and everything. I just thought you were ignoring me. But now I understand it's because you're hallucinating. Such a much better explanation. Are you okay?" She was smiling during the whole sentence. At the time, I thought it was because my confusion was amusing to her, but now I think I understand that it is because her causing my confusion is amusing to her. It didn't help when I walked back into the living room to grab my phone and noticed her purse was no longer in the middle of the coffee table, but in the corner. Now, that might seem like an easy detail to mess up, and I don't mean to brag, but I have a fairly good memory. When I was in school, I wouldn't need to study a whole lot because I would have everything remembered fairly quickly and I was successful because I got all A's throughout high school and even into college. Hell, I went to UCLA using my quick study methods. My point is, I know where her purse was when I left, and I know where she was when I left to the bathroom. She confused me and made me feel crazy, but I am certain what I saw, or at least I think so. She insisted on driving to the restaurant, and I agreed because at the moment I was still very confused, and if I was wrong, then it would be wise not to drive. Our car ride was filled with music, and our date was filled with normalities. Well, that was until she went to the bathroom. I need to explain what happened before she went to the bathroom so you can understand what was off after she left for the bathroom. We were sat down by our waiter, who spoke in a soft Yorkshire accent. He was charming and offered us some great options to eat, and I actually ordered one of those options. I believe it was grilled chicken with fried rice and a special restaurant sauce. But after he left with our order, Lucille got up and left to go to the bathroom. Now, I am no expert on female bathroom habits, but she was gone for a long time. She was gone so long that our food arrived. I waited a bit before my hunger pushed me to eat my dish while hers was greeted with the cold chills of the restaurant air, and the heat left the dish. Now this is the weird part. Our waiter had looped back around to ask about the check before noticing Lucille's food had not as much as a hole in it from a fork stabbing it. He frowned, and in his soft, brummy accent, he asked, "Did she leave you suddenly?" "I'm sorry. I'll see about getting that charge covered for you." I told him he didn't need to do that. She was just having bathroom troubles with the best poker face I had. Now, I am no Brit, but I know the difference in his accent when he sat us and took our order, and his accent when he asked me about Lucille leaving. I watched carefully where he went, and after a moment I stood up and tailed him, but he had disappeared into the kitchen without any clear line of sight on him. I decided then and there to head towards the bathrooms, and when I approached the women's bathroom, there was this lady walking towards the bathroom, so I asked her to check on my girlfriend for me. After a few moments, she walked back out, staring darts at my face, and rudely told me, "There is no woman in there. You must be confused. Maybe she left you." I was taken aback. First of all, why does everyone assume my girlfriend would just leave me? Secondly, and more importantly, where the fuck is Lucille? I apologized, probably shouldn't have, to the woman, and headed back to my table, and there was Lucille. At the table, with half her meal gone, I was utterly perplexed. What was happening? I sat down, and her wide eyes and curious tone cued me into the words I didn't hear while I was chewing on the complexity of the last 30 minutes. She had asked, "Where were you? You've been gone an awfully long time to go take a piss." I shook my head and barely answered her question before I asked a passing waiter for the check. We paid and went home, but the entire ride I sat confused. She kept hounding me about why I was gone so long, but I simply ignored it. I didn't forget about Sunday or Friday. I'll call it TV night and restaurant night for simplicity's sake, because the next Monday was even worse. The dread I felt when I got to work and my boss suddenly had blonde hair instead of his deep black hair emptied my mind of past worries and filled it with the current one. I work in an office, so I didn't get to speak to my boss as he passed by, but I leaned over and asked my co-worker if she saw the boss's hair, and she just shrugged her shoulders and said, "He probably just dyed it." I paused for a moment before I leaned back towards my desk and continued working. That whole day I barely saw my boss yet. Everything in the office was so off, and what I heard on the news when I got home did not help either. I got home before Lucille and wanted to tune out the insane thoughts that were liquefying my brain. So I turned on the TV, and before I could change the channel, the news caught my full attention. The waiter from our Friday restaurant date was missing. The exact waiter. I felt time freeze around me as my senses dulled, until the only thing that was real was my inner voice telling me to run. I wanted to get up and get away, but the spaghetti that had replaced my legs weren't very good at running. I never had felt so closed in, but I knew my girlfriend wasn't getting home for at least another hour. I took a few minutes to breathe, and then I got up and packed my stuff. I made such a mess and knocked over so many things in my rush that when I left my bedroom, I heard the items in the closet collapse and knock the door open, but I had no time to fix any mess. I packed 2 suitcases and wrote a note for my girlfriend, just in case she was still the woman I had fallen in love with. My note gave away 0 information, just a clear note that was written in red Sharpie that read, "I need to get away for a few days. I'll be back later." I got in my car and drove an hour away to my mum's house. She lives secluded in the woods in a small neighborhood. Lucille had only been there once, and I doubt she remembered her way back. She always sucked with directions. The whole drive I was so preoccupied with the waiter being missing since our date on Friday that I almost hit this wolf. Or maybe it was a coyote. I didn't notice when it was just standing in the middle of the road, staring at me, and so I had to slam on my brakes to avoid it. I waited a minute or 2 before it walked back into the woods. Once I made it there, I grabbed the suitcase and knocked on the door. My mom was surprised to see me, but she was elated to see me before she was worried that my visit was over relationship issues. I reassured her that it wasn't. I mean, it was, but not for the reasons she thought. If I am honest with myself and you all, I don't see my mom enough. I'm sure she's lonely sometimes. Her neighborhood doesn't have too many people her age to hang around, and my dad passed away a few years back. I miss him, but it might be good. He doesn't live in a world where his son runs back home because something is tricking him, going after him. I feel so crazy. I feel insane, but I feel like something is after me. My waiter's shifting accent and disappearance, my girlfriend's behavior and eyes, and my boss's hair changing. Sorry for the rant, but it was relieving to see my mom. I just told her I missed her and wanted to spend time with her. I didn't want her worrying about what I'm sure she'd perceive as my mental health. That whole night was so relaxing. I spent hours just talking to my mom and having fun. I felt relaxed for the first time since before I went on my date. We talked and played some card games, and she made the best tasting burger I ever had in my life. When I asked her what made the burger special, she just replied, "Well, your mom makes any burger special, of course." I laughed, but I would have loved the recipe. As we called it a night, I went to sleep in my childhood bedroom. I saw all the books on my shelf from when I was younger, and I noticed the fairy tales and kids' books especially. Rapunzel, Otto Goes to the Beach, Little Red Riding Hood, and Hansel and Gretel. I smiled at the books and remembered my mom tucking me and my brother into bed, reading us stories until we passed out. I never got rid of those old books. Even if their covers were worn down to dust, they meant so much. My parents were fervent about being parents, and it made my childhood so bright. I got in bed, and while it took me a bit to finally sleep, it was some of the best rest I had in a week. I rose from my bed the next morning, noticing I slept in. I got up and made quick work to get out of my room, and as soon as I opened the door, the aroma of flavors wafted past my nose and carried me towards the kitchen. As my body moved, I deciphered the smells. The smell of savory eggs, delicious bacon, the inviting smell of blueberry waffles, and maple syrup. I stopped dead in my tracks as I smelled the syrup, and I used all my might to not collapse and break. My mom was allergic to syrup. In fact, when I was about 8, my family went to this new diner about 30 minutes away from home, and we had begun eating, not realizing they dipped their waffle batter in syrup, and my mom immediately broke out into hives and nearly died then and there. My dad rushed me, my brother, and my mom to the ER. As my mom lay in the back seat, I was administering her an EpiPen. I remember every sound and smell vividly to this day, even the feeling of stabbing her thigh with the pen as air broke her past, the gasps stuck in her windpipes. I was frozen in place as my mom, or whatever that was, turned the corner and greeted me. "Hey!" I saw you were sleeping, so I decided to go ahead and whip up something great. I made eggs and bacon, and I even made blueberry waffles. I had to go run to the store quickly to grab some syrup, and the whole time the cashier gave me this weird look like getting syrup early in the morning was some sort of crime. "Is everything all right? You look concerned." I stared blankly at my mom as I about screamed, damn near collapsed, cried, and just begged this monster to kill me now. I don't know what it wants from me, but I want this to be over with. I didn't say anything for a minute, so this wolf in sheep's clothing asked me again, "Is everything all right? You look concerned." This time, though, as the sentence left my mom's mouth, a wicked smile began to overtake her face. I stammered, and my words might have not come out exactly like this, but I said something to the tune of, yeah, I'm fine. I just realized that I left my phone in my room. Just 1 second. I'll be back in a minute. As I turned around to walk back to my room and devise a strategy to leave this place, I got 2 ideas. The first being to turn around and ask this shell of my mother, "Hey Mom, are you going to eat with me?" She turned back, smiled, and responded, "Oh, yes, of course. I can't wait to enjoy those waffles with you." Now, my mom usually had waffles, just without syrup, so I needed to press further. "Can't let that syrup you got go to waste, right? Make sure you stack the syrup on thick for my waffles." I shot back at her. "Well, of course. What's a waffle without butter and some delicious syrup?" she exclaimed. I walked back into my room, locked the door, pushed the bookshelf in front of it, and gathered my items. I wasn't taking both suitcases. I needed to leave quickly once I leapt out my bedroom window. I grabbed my phone, my wallet, and my keys, and made sure I had a semblance of self before I opened the window and darted out to my car. I gave this thing too much warning when I left last time, so this time I hopped in my car and drove off. Based on the fact I hadn't heard from my girlfriend from when I left, never saw the waiter and my girlfriend together after she went to the bathroom. I assume this thing only takes one body at a time, and I wanted to test this. Oddly enough, Lucille gets Tuesdays off, so she would be at home relaxing. That is if she is still alive and not taken over by some monster. Now, I also know that I probably shouldn't have brought my phone with me, but I don't think that is how I was tracked. I think I was followed by this thing. I put the pedal to the metal and raced back home, running red lights and possibly leaving some collisions behind me. But I didn't care, because if I beat this thing home and saw my girlfriend, I could know that as long as she stayed in my line of sight. She is safe, but if she's not there, then I need to run as quickly as possible. I pulled up to the driveway and raced up to my front door. I unlocked it and was welcomed by a house of silence. My gut began sinking like water in oil. I shut the door and called out for her, but got no response. I headed to our bedroom, and it was about as disheveled as when I ran. My heart beating out my chest, my head throbbing, shoulders tensing from stress. I began focusing on each step as I inched my feet toward the spare bedroom. I opened the door to the bedroom and it looked about right. I opened the guest bedroom closet and gasped. There was no Lucille, but there was the skin of the waiter. No bones, no organs, no blood, no hair, just skin. The skin, other than the scalp, was all intact, just like how a normal person would have their skin positioned without organs holding it together. It was a skin suit. As I was staring at the flesh of some poor victim of being in my vicinity, I heard the door smash open. It was my girlfriend's voice, so I hid in the closet as I pulled up our doorbell camera on my phone. I don't know what that was, but it wasn't Lucille. That is for damn sure. It's still calling out for me. As I am hiding in this closet, what should I do? Someone please help me. I am terrified and I don't want to become a skin suit. Story 7. A monster comes in my room and gives me a kiss every night. I was a typical little runt that used to think a monster was in my closet. When I was 5 years old, I was always hopping out of my bed and dashing straight into my dad's room screaming, "He's here! He's here!" Like the laid-back kind of guy he was. My dad would get up in the middle of the night without a fuss and walk me back to my room. The first thing he did once we got there was go to my closet and open the door, to show me for the 100th time that there was nothing there. Often he spun back around with a smile, pointing right at the empty space in the doorway. "You have one hell of an imagination. Sport," he once said. "Now let's get you back to bed." It was routine for him to tuck me in and give a gentle kiss on my forehead every time he did this, followed by one last smile before heading out. Even at that young age, I wasn't easily swayed by Dad's late-night closet inspections. I knew there was something there. How it just seemed to disappear every time Dad checked the closet was beyond me. When Dad wasn't around to check anything, I'd hear persistent noises coming from the closet. Sometimes it was the classic bump in the night. I used to also hear humming, like someone trying to desperately escape a hand covering their mouth. At other times I swore I heard crying. I remember thinking, now why is the monster crying? The monster's crying made me cry for many nights. My little heart was leaping rapidly as I watched the door shake, and the doorknob rattle as whatever was inside tried to get out. As I got older, I was still experiencing the same, and I can tell you one thing, it was barely any less frightening than before. But being older also meant that it wouldn't be as acceptable to go running into a parent's room every time I got scared throughout the night. So I found ways to deal with it. From then on, when I heard the first hum or cry from the closet, I'd just pull the covers over my head and wait for it to stop, which it usually did, or put my earbuds on and turn the music up to high volume. Several times I'd take them out and still hear bumping and crying. I went years not knowing exactly what was lingering in the pit of my closet. The main reason being, I always made sure to keep my closet door locked and shut before going to bed. Other than the strange noises coming from my closet, I would also hear Dad walking around the house every other night. At random times I'd hear him walk all over the house, opening doors and rummaging. Anytime I heard him coming down the hall towards my room, I pretended to be asleep. He always walked past and continued on doing whatever he was doing. The first time he did enter my room, I was surprised to see that he was fully clothed. He had on his usual outdoor fit, his flannel shirt, cargo pants, and baseball cap. Why was he all dressed up in the middle of the night? He went straight to my closet and pried the door open. After rummaging inside for a few seconds, he closed the door, then came over to my bed to give me a kiss on the cheek. He exited my room afterwards. Some nights he'd leave the house and I'd hear the engine on his pickup truck go off outside. After hopping out of bed and peering out my window, I could see him cruising past me on the road. He usually came pulling back in about an hour later. Then he'd go to the shed that sat many yards away from my window. Where could he possibly need to go past 3 in the morning? Weirdest thing was, he never mentioned any of it to me on the following day. Never told me about him getting up in the middle of the night to make rounds. One night when Dad came into my room, he forgot to close the closet back before he left. But this time I was asleep when he came in. I just so happened to wake up and see my closet door slowly creaking open. I hopped out of bed and rushed over to close it. But I stopped when something reached out of the crack. A hand. It was very filthy and dirt-covered. The hand reached around for some seconds, until it got a hold of the edge of the door. The door opened wider. Slowly I started to back away, fear now starting to consume me. But the monster was about to consume me next. We slipped up, Dad slipped up, and the monster would finally get what it salivated for, after so long. As the door creaked open even wider, I felt my heart leaping in my chest. I turned to run before the door opened completely, but it was too late. By the time I took my first step, the creature in the doorway had already made itself visible. Well, it might as well have been a creature. The creature in my closet turned out to be very human. It was a young woman, strings of her wet and soggy hair stuck to the sides of her face, which was streaked with dirt and sweat. She wore nothing but a bra and torn panties. The rest of her body appeared to be slightly filthier than her face, like she hadn't showered in months. She looked as if she wasn't able to stand or walk, or at least had a hard time doing so, as she struggled to even stay on her knees. As soon as the woman saw me, her eyes widened. Then she started reaching out to me with one hand. At the time, the sight of this scared the shit out of me. But the more I look back and think about this moment, it's now obvious that the woman had more fear in her than I did. She was terrified. If she could scream, I'm pretty sure she would have awakened my father by now. She wanted to scream. Only problem was, her lips had been stapled shut, from one end to the other. The closest she could get to screaming was the familiar humming I've grown accustomed to after so many years. In the middle of all the desperate humming, I swear could hear her trying to say, "Please," or "Get me out of here," Her eyes grew watery, then many tears streamed down her filthy face. She kept reaching out to me, then she started crawling towards me in a wobbly fashion, still scared out of my mind. I backed away until I hit the wall behind me. Then I dropped to the floor, staring at the thing that I'm pretty sure used to be a normal, decent-looking young lady. I knew I could have stood up and bolted past her with ease, but I couldn't look away. What was happening before my eyes was surreal. So this was it? The thing that's been driving me crazy since I was 5? Where did it come from? I wondered what she'd do when she reached me, but to my surprise, when she saw my opened bedroom door, she turned away and crawled in that direction instead. As she slowly made her way out of my bedroom, I noticed one more chilling detail about her. Her right foot, it was missing. There was nothing there but a mushy stump with dead tissue and dried blood smeared around the ankle. I was relieved that she was no longer crawling towards me, but I was still uncomfortable with the fact this sick woman was about to crawl all over our house. But I sure as hell wasn't about to stop her. No way I was touching that thing. I heard a vehicle pull up outside, then the sound of an engine going off. Dad. I wasn't aware he was gone. I was thinking he was still in the house the whole time. When I heard his truck door open and close, I anticipated the moment he came into the house. When I heard the front door open, I hurriedly hopped back into bed and threw the covers over my head. Then I created a small opening in the sheets to peep out of. The sounds of Dad's boots out in the hall seemed to be unnerving to the woman, as her shaking and wobbling grew worse when it started. She had just made it to the doorway of my bedroom when Dad spotted her. "Oh, no you don't, darling," Dad said with a chuckle. The woman tried to scream, but of course couldn't. Dad picked her up and threw her over his shoulder. She wiggled around, delivering several weak kicks and punches to the air in an attempt to escape Dad's grasp, but it did no good. Dad went to my closet. Then I heard him close and lock something inside. On the way out, the woman continued to struggle and make several feeble attempts at breaking free. I peeped her grotesque face looking at me as Dad left. "Now I've had enough of you," Dad muttered out in the hall. As soon the front door opened and closed again, I right away hopped back out of bed and ran out to the living room. While crouching down, I looked out the window and saw Dad walking to his truck with the woman still on his shoulder. He went to the back seat and opened the door. After reaching inside to grab something, he shut the door again and began walking towards the shed. My attention went back to the truck again, specifically to the passenger side. Someone's head suddenly shot up, as if they were asleep or knocked unconscious at first. Another woman. From where I was, it looked like her mouth was duct taped. Both of her arms appeared to be bound behind her back. Like the woman in my closet, she looked terrified and confused. When I saw Dad enter the shed, I carefully opened the front door before stepping outside, making sure not to make too much noise. I trotted over to the truck and got a closer look at the woman in the passenger seat. Yeah, her mouth was duct taped. She had definitely been crying at one point too, indicated by her smeared eyeliner and the dried tears on her face. She jumped as soon as she laid eyes on me. Then we stared at each other through the glass for seconds. Her eyes were wide, begging me, clearly wanting to mutter, "Help!
Don't just stand there!"
I tried to open the door, but I was instantly reminded of the auto-lock feature the truck had. The woman's face scrunched up to cry more when she saw I couldn't open it. Then more tears started to dance in her eyes, prepared to wash away the dried ones. Crouching again, I started tiptoeing towards the shed. I felt bad having to leave the woman behind, but at least she was aware I tried. The shed had a light posted above the doorway that shined a few yards away from where the shed was. So I couldn't just run straight for the door without risking Dad unexpectedly popping out and spotting me. Instead, I used the surrounding darkness to hide in until I reached the side of the building. I put my back to the wall and made my way to the edge of the doorframe, one careful step at a time. "Looks like I need to put a better lock on that door," I heard Dad mutter. I took a quick glance at the woman in the truck and saw that she was watching me. When I peeped around the corner of the doorframe, I saw the first woman Dad carried out of my room. She was standing on her scarred knees, body facing me. She had her head hung low, staring at the ground, her soggy hair just dangling. Dad had his back turned, rummaging through the toolbox nearby. "But I fault you. You should know better," he said. The woman held her head up for a few seconds, which caused my heart to make a giant leap that almost left me panting. Seeing her mouth stapled up like that was just too much for me. But there was something else behind the woman that caught my attention. Right next to another empty compartment was a small door. It was open, and there was nothing but blackness inside. This was a surprise to me. Because of all the times I've been in the shed with Dad, I've never known this area to have a door. When I saw Dad starting to turn around, I backed away, then leaned in again, only to see him standing in front of the woman. He was holding something at his side, a staple gun. I started to panic again upon seeing this, but calmed down when I saw Dad place the staple gun behind him on the workbench. He reached into one of his pockets and drew a large Bowie knife. I could hear the woman starting to whimper. "You had some nerve," Dad chuckled, before raising his knife. He stabbed the woman somewhere within her upper body, but I couldn't see, as he was in the way. I could only hear the blade puncture her, as she coughed and choked. As Dad started moving his arm in a back and forth motion, I could also hear the woman's blood splashing the shed floor relentlessly. "No," I whispered, very silently. I backed away to keep from seeing what was going on, and put both my hands over my face. Standing there listening to Dad cut through that woman's tissue and bodily organs put me on the brink of tears. But the sound of the truck's alarms going off intervened. I glanced towards the truck and saw the passenger door wide open. The second woman that was in the passenger seat hastily hopped out and began running away. "Oh shit," Dad said. I quickly ran back to the side of the shed, just in time to avoid Dad dashing out and running after the woman, knife still in hand, dripping with blood. As soon as him and the second woman faded away into the dark distance, I ran into the shed. But the grotesque sight before me stopped me in my tracks. The first woman was nearly decapitated, her head barely hanging onto the rest of her body by a mere piece of flesh and bone. Blood rushed out of her exposed neck. My attention went to the small open door again. I made sure not to step into the blood pool as I made my way around the woman's mutilated body. I was so shocked that part of me couldn't take my eyes off of it. When I got to the opened small door, I peered inside and saw almost nothing but the same blackness I saw from the doorway. But being closer allowed me to get a deeper gaze inside, which revealed a tunnel that went several feet ahead. I could see traces of dim light glowing from an unknown source further down in there. Weird. I took one look behind me before climbing inside and starting to crawl. At the beginning, there was a downward steep angle that almost sent me tumbling down. But I caught myself and continued. The length of the tunnel seemed to be much greater than what I anticipated, as around a minute had passed and I was still crawling. A few cobwebs wrapped themselves around my face here and there, and I spotted a couple spiders crawling along the way. If it weren't for that small source of light ahead, I may not have gone in. It would have been like crawling into an abyss without it. After more seconds of crawling, I eventually came across an area that wasn't as narrow and closed in as the rest of the tunnel. It was wider in width and height. I was even able to stand up and walk around in it. But I had to drop down from where I was to do so. It was like a small room. The first thing I see is a very bright fluorescent light hanging along one of the walls. Beneath that was an old, worn-out and dingy mattress lying on the floor. Just above the mattress looked like a metal hook, in which several women's bras hang. I thought I saw some dark spots on the mattress, so I moved in closer to check. Yup, blood splatter. Although at the time I didn't know what was going on. Being down there was still unnerving. I could sense there was something very wrong about the place. On the opposite side of where I dropped down was another opening that looked identical to what I just dropped down from. The tunnel extended even further than this. At this point, I was already yards away from the shed. What could possibly go beyond this area? I left the area and climbed into the opening on the other side. After crawling from there for a few more minutes, I surprisingly reached an end. It was, of course, dark, so at first it appeared that the end was dead. I thought I'd have to turn around and backtrack the entire distance I came, but after reaching and feeling around, I accidentally lifted something above me. Whatever it was heavily fell back down. I lifted it again. It appeared to be a trap door of some sort. I sighed, thinking there was yet more to discover. I lifted the door once again, this time cracking it open completely. After raising my head through the opening, I was surprised to see my bedroom. In front of me was my bed a short distance away. I could hear the soft breeze from my opened window. Confused, I climbed out of the hole I was in and glanced behind me. Nothing there but a patch of darkness with some of my junk sticking out in different areas. I closed the door I came out of and found that at first glance it was very hard to notice the boundary between the door and the rest of the surrounding floor. This was hiding in plain sight the whole time, but why would he want to put this in my closet? My guess was that he thought I'd never think to look in my own room for a secret dungeon. "Get off of me!"
Let me go!
I heard a feminine voice scream outside the window. Before I even came close to the window, I could already see Dad from a distance, dragging the woman towards the shed by her leg. She tried her best to kick Dad with her free leg as she wildly threw her arms, screaming. "Please!" She continued begging until her and Dad both entered the shed. A minute later, Dad came back out again and shut the door behind him. When I saw him turn and began heading in my direction, I quickly ducked, then trotted to my bed while still crouching. I laid under the covers and waited until I heard the front door open. The sound of his boots thudding the floor seemed more terrifying to me now. As the thuds got closer to my bedroom, my heart leaped uncontrollably. In my mind, this was no longer my dad in my room anymore. This was someone else. Feeling the covers being pulled from over my head made me jump, but luckily I don't think he noticed. I shut my eyes and pretended to be asleep. The smell of gasoline and kerosene radiating from his clothing filled my nostrils. He kissed me on the forehead before retucking me in. I heard him go to the closet and shut the door. Then he left my room before leaving the house. There was a brief moment of peace, but it wasn't too long before the horrifying screams of agony echoed from the shed. Unfortunately, the strange sounds in my closet didn't stop. For many years going on, I was still tormented by the shaking and humming on the other side of the door. After that night, I knew it was her down there, the woman I saw in Dad's truck. Every time I heard the humming and bumping from then on, all I could do was just imagine her stapled lips and filth-covered body, just desperately beating and clawing away in hopes of escape, wanting to scream but can't. No matter how scared she was, I was sure she met the same fate as the first woman, but being aware of what it actually was inside barely reduced the fear. Honestly, knowing the truth may have made things worse. Although I saw Dad kill the monster in the shed, the monster still wasn't really dead. It continued to live underground beneath my closet, psychologically tormenting and filling me with the fear I'm sure was mutual. The monster wasn't going to die anytime soon, as it also came into my room and gave me a kiss every night. Story 8. My best friend Matty's went missing just as I am dealing with a serious mold problem. Oh, fuck. Matty's gone. I stress talked at Jen while I stress ate a handful of chocolate-covered espresso beans a friend of mine had recently sent me from Guatemala. I had awoken this morning to day number 3 of the brand new, non-caffeinated me. Looked like the end of the line for that peace train. I wasn't sure I cared anymore. Slow. Down. David. Jen said, "Where is my husband?" "You sound like the chick in The Incredible Hulk," I said. "I just got off the F train," Jen said, ignoring my Marvel reference. "I'm coming right over and I'm bringing coffee, David, and chocolate. I just got another fucking 40% off up to $15 promotion."
Fucking AI.
You hear me? AI? Just fuck off and fuck you. By the way, tell Matty I said he should try answering his wife's fucking messages for a change. 15 minutes later, my golden retriever, Archer, was whimpering his hello into Jen's crotch like it was thundering outside or something. It was actually a sunny day without a cloud in the sky, but it was grayer, Then the first scene of The Wizard of Oz in my heart. Jen told Archer what a good boy he was. Enabler. I was modifying a couple of blonde roasts Jen had brought over, along with a few bags of dark chocolate and sea salt covered almonds. I was busy reheating the coffee. I didn't like lukewarm coffee. I poured the coffees from their cups into my new Michelangelo sauce pot. I then added all the chocolate-covered nuts and espresso beans. Then I turned up the heat. Behind my back, Jen said, "David, where the fuck is Matty? People don't just disappear. I mean, Matty disappears sometimes, but not disappears. He's just slow to respond to texts and voice calls." This was rough. I loved Jen, like a sister. Since freshman year, that's when I met her and Matty, and we all became friends. Except her and Matty. It was more than just friends. It was fire. Anyhow, time for that last cup of coffee. Got to make it count. The trick was reheating the coffee and dark chocolate-covered almonds and espresso beans to the proper temperature before transferring the chocolate-infused brew into proper coffee mugs. The ones on my kitchen counter sported Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall images all over them. When the chocolate had fully melted into the coffee, I slowly began stirring the sugary caffeinated concoction with a steel chopstick. Joe began to imitate my life. Boil, boil, toil and trouble. I lowered the flame to a faint blue simmer while continuing to stir clockwise. I looked down at Matty's hastily abandoned sneaker. There was more mold and mildew on it than the last time I had glanced. I looked down at my own feet. They seemed fine. Matty's shoe looked pretty expensive and not to have seen very much mileage. 2 hours ago, I had been going through the divorce from hell. I needed someone I could trust. Phoebe was trying to ruin me. I think her lawyer had something personal against me too. She had passed me in the hallway of her law firm once, and I could have sworn she muttered, "Trout breath," at me. "It's your upper lip," I had heard myself mutter back. Matty, Dave, baby. We're blood brothers since '86, baby. Blood brothers. Dave. We bros gotta stick together. We all fam. Dave. Me. Phoebe and her shyster are trying to eat me alive in the divorce. Matty. Matty. Dude. That fucking bitch. I always knew she was a bitch. Bruh. But my cousin Charlie's hooking you up. Right? Jen and I got you. My brother. I had foolishly sought representation from Matty's ambulance-chasing cousin, Charlie, who was always with the runny nose and the Abbott and Costello haunted house painting eyes. No, that's another thing I needed to talk to you about. Bruh, I had told Matty. Charlie's a... And then I called Charlie a bad word. Matty had frowned. But he ain't even charging.
Bruh!
Maybe, but I get the feeling it's gonna cost me. Probably a lot if Charlie don't get dropped now. Matty frowned. He did that when he didn't get his way. I got a plan. Matty, I said with a smile that came to my face but was sad one just the same. Matty. Oh, shit. My blood brother. Matty exclaimed, lighting up like a pinball machine. My man got a secret cash stash. Amirite, you flexin'. Hoss, gimme the loot. Gimme the loot. I had shrugged. Whenever Matty tried to be urban, I felt embarrassed for him. His parents, their parents, and me. Matty, I want to show you something. Matty, yeah. Hoss, you gonna show me the loot? Loot? Matty's eyes lit up like Christmas in Sin City. I had pulled a joint out of my pocket. See that wall? I asked Matty. Matty seemed annoyed. The one with the mold? Yeah. So what? It's fucking disgusting. You should do something about that. Never mind that, I said. You watching? I asked, emphasizing my words with my eyebrows like a stern Groucho. Matty often had intrusive thoughts and could be a little obsessive-compulsive from time to time. He had ADHD too. Okay, Hoss, I'm watching, Matty had said. What's the gag? You want me to hold your cash stash, bros? I took the joint, a barbecue lighter, got the joint going and filled my lungs with a healthy drag. I then looked at Matty, let out the smoke and said, watch. I then flicked the joint at a big moldy spot, covering a large swath of the wall in shimmering spores, from cabinet to shining cabinet. Before the joint could collide with the spore zone, it simply vanished. Into thin air. Oh shit. What the fuck? Matty exclaimed, his eyes big as an 80s satellite dish. It's the craziest thing, I began. You want to hear about it? Matty said he did. So, I told him the story. And then Matty didn't believe me. So as usual, we argued. But this time, Matty got a little physical. I wasn't going to fight my brother. But before it came to blows, Matty slipped on some mold and mildew. Yeah, fate put out a foot and Matty slipped. And then we looped back to the beginning. Matty's gone. But Jen didn't know what Bo knows. Jen didn't know why there was a lonely shoe on my kitchen floor, and I wasn't ready to tell her where her betrothed might be. Was there more mold there then before I awoke? No. It was only under the sink and on the wall. What a sad fucking song I was singing. Mold and mildew.
How do you do?
Dave.
David!
Fucking Earth to David?
Hello?
McFly?
I looked at Jen. Tell me slowly from the beginning why you keep saying my Matty is gone, and you need to fucking have me roust Phoebe to come here when you know she only likes you slightly better than her peanut allergy. Phoebe's still coming, right? I asked. Jen put down her coffee with a thud. Archer looked at her. His ears were a bit back and he had that golden retriever. Should I be worried look? You're fucking neurotic. David. And yes, she's coming. Jen looked at her watch. And in about 10 minutes. So if you're going to tell me what the big funny fucking joke is now would be the right time. Jen was right. I had to tell her. She was a solid citizen, ever since we were all living together during college. Yeah, I could tell. Jen, listen. David, we had our coffee. You showed me your gain-of-function biohazard spore farm of a fucking wall. Now tell me what the fuck you're talking about. Seriously. I went into my freezer and got a joint out of a Tupperware. I got it lit. I took a hit. I let it out and said, I'm going to flick this at the wall, and this joint is going to fucking blink the fucking fuckity fuck out of actual existence. Do you understand? Jen said, you might want to give that legal weed a rest. Dave, you watching? When I was sure Jen was, I flicked it at the spot and it blinked out of existence. Oh shit. What the fuck? Jen exclaimed, her eyes big as an 80s satellite dish. That's what everybody says, I said. David? It looked like school was in session and it was time to tell the tale. It started back in '99 when I flicked a joint in my freezer and it straight up disappeared. Couldn't find it anywhere. Bugged me the fuck out. Then a couple of years later I was hiding an ounce from Phoebe under the baseboard heater. And then when I went to retrieve it, I bobbled it and it bounced off my knee and landed under the sink in the mold and well, poof, bye-bye, Maui Wowie. What the actual fuck does this have to do with you calling me like I'm 911 to report a missing Matty? And what the fuck is up with his shoe? And this fucking mold and mildew black hole? If you and Matty are fucking with me, you'll both be wearing your nuts for earrings. Okay, I said, taking a slow and deep breath through my nostrils. Archer looked at me. I put out my hand in the stay it's okay sign. Archer reluctantly plopped down and sighed audibly. Matty and I are definitely not fucking with you. Jen, I'm not sure where Matty is right now. Honest to God. Listen, Phoebe's gonna be here any minute and I need you to know some things. Okay? Jen looked at me and wrinkled her nose. Talk. You know Phoebe's divorcing me like it was feeding time in the piranha tank, right? I asked. Well, you're both my friends, so, Jen said lackadaisically. Well, that's how it is. But you know, the last couple of years something really changed. It was like I couldn't do anything right, and Phoebe kept acting like I was the one acting all sus. She kept wanting to check my phone, accusing me of being, I guess, well, non-monogamous, and her fucking spending. Once the bills came due for horse psychics and Atlantic City trips, we sat down to talk and she just told me, and I shit you not, I'm a blonde bombshell, Do you understand? A blonde bombshell. David, bombshell. Jen forgot she was annoyed at me, and maybe Matty was eating cheese in some black mouse hole sun. Jen said, bombshell? What is that even supposed to mean? It means I had a rap with my bro, and your hubby, Matty, and he got me his cousin Charlie, the lawyer, to represent. I figured you were trying to stay neutral like Switzerland, but shit. Jen, all our joint accounts got drained, and then all our joint credit cards got maxed and not even remotely relaxed. I heard her on the phone tell Monica she got her butthole bleached. Twice. Jen sighed as understanding dawned upon her face. Anyway, after Phoebe split, she served me with divorce papers the next day. And fucking Choo-Choo Charlie kept telling me he had it all under control, but I had this feeling he needed to look up control in the dictionary, and I didn't have time to wait. So, I decided to hire a specialist. A fucking private eye. Not quite. There's this curio shop by the French cafe. They sell all this occult shit, books and potions. I saw the dude online at the French cafe and asked him about walls that eat shit. No shit. Zero shit. And guess what? He had a book about mystically malevolent mold and mildew that can open holes into other dimensions and shit. Dark shitholes. Jen, hungry shit that wants to eat shit from our dimension like a croc eating a deer. It ain't pretty. Jen, crocs eating deer ain't really me. Does this specialist have a name? Herman. Anyway, this fucking Herman guy has a cousin who's a retired NYPD detective, and he did Herman a favor. I took another joint out, deciding I'd smoke it before flicking it into wherever the fuck the wild things are. Jen said, "This is fucking crazy. You had a detective follow Phoebe. She's been fucking this other dude, Jen, for at least 2 years." Jen's eyebrows went up like those things over the 6 key. "You're sure? Phoebe? No fucking way. Not our Phoebe." "No doubt. He found receipts, phone records, security footage. He followed her around. You get the picture. Now." Jen tilted her chin to catch the last drop of my espresso almond mocha latte. Without warning, the front door buzzer buzzed loudly. Archer got up on his hind legs and barked. A lot. "That's gotta be Phoebe," I said. Archer got a little nuts and started running back and forth across our tiny one-bedroom. A minute later, I let Phoebe in. She brushed past me. Archer approached her cautiously. She looked down at him. Archer sniffed her crotch, looked at me, then decided to return to Jen's side on the floor. Phoebe kissed Jen on the cheek. "Okay," Phoebe said. "What was so fucking important that your lawyer couldn't tell my lawyer? David, you know we are not supposed to communicate directly, and you know exactly why. It's because you are a narcissistic, cheating and delusional rap music loving, left-leaning, emotionally dysregulated toon of a television character. A goddamned, shallow and superficial, two-dimensional doofus, while I am a spiritually enlightened, well-adjusted and resilient five-dimensional goddess bombshell. Get it? Understand, Dave? Do? You? Understand? Comprendes? Got it! I'm a Delulu cluster b-boy, and you are the Queen of Sheba. I got it. But I got to tell you something about Matty, and it also involves money." Phoebe's face relaxed a bit. It seemed to be engrossed in some calculus. "What money? What about Matty?" I took a manila envelope out from under the kitchen counter and took 3 8-10 photos out and placed them face down. I moved them around. "This isn't funny," Phoebe complained. "David," Jen intoned. "Patience," I counseled. I then pulled out another envelope. I emptied its contents on the kitchen counter. It was nearly 100 large. Phoebe's eyes looked like 2 black holes in the sky. "Come here, Phoebes. Watch the watch." Like a moth to a flame, Phoebe approached the cash stacks wide-eyed. "Gimme the loot, gimme the loot. I knew you were fucking holding out." Phoebe snarled. "It's yours," I said. "All you gotta do is flip the photos without falling off the earth." Phoebe pushed past me, standing near Matty's now moldy shoe. "Yeah, That shoe was moldy as fuck. What a difference 30 minutes makes. Phoebe looked at the cash. Realizing it was real, she furiously flipped the photos. Photo number 1. Phoebe performing an intimate act on Matty in my office. Photo number 2. Matty performing an intimate act on a roller skate wearing Phoebe. Photo number 3. Matty and Phoebe knocking boots in our marital bed. My red blanket was mostly off the bed, and the corner of the blanket was wet with dog slobber dripping from Archer's mouth. Phoebe, you fucked my husband? Jen asked incredulously. Phoebe looked up. Archer let out a low sound that could have been a prelude to a low growl. Phoebe? Phoebe looked at Jen, then she looked at me. So, fucking, what, friends? We're not friends. Ha, don't make me laugh. We drink fucking coffee together and split rent because the cost of living forces my blonde bombshell bootyliciousness to deal with you fucking rugrats. So, if I wanted to fuck Matty, then Matty's getting fucked. Okay. I looked at Jen. Want to see something really fucked up? Jen? Jen looked at me. Then she looked at the pictures. Then she looked at Phoebe. Yes, I do want to see something really fucked up. Dave. I nodded. I looked at Archer. I put up my hand and said, "Stay." Archer, stay. Phoebe said, "Give me the fucking loot." But before she could finish, I stepped behind her and held her by both shoulders. I put the sole of my shoe against her ass and then pushed her into the mildew without further ado. "Bitch," I said. Phoebe yelled, "You mother." But I never got the rest of it because she hit the wall and kept going deep into nothingness. And that's exactly what I felt when I looked at Jen. "I really gotta move to a new crib," I said. "You really fucking do," she said. "Like, grab the loot and let's get the fuck out of here." We did. Downstairs on the street, Joey and Monica pulled in front of the hydrant in Joey's new SUV. "Hey,
Guys!
where's your better halves?" Monica laughed alone to her own joke. Joey said, "Yeah." "Hey, Jen." "Hey, David. Where's Phoebes and Matty?" I looked at Jen. Jen looked at me. Archer looked at everybody. I didn't know what to say.
So,
I said nothing. Somewhere I heard a car stereo playing "Don't Stop Believing" by Journey. Kinda makes you question everything, you know? Story 9. Missing posters. Ralph walked a lot, like every day a lot. He had lost his car a few years ago during the pandemic, not because he couldn't pay for it, but because he had a habit of driving drunk and the cops took his license after the third time. So it didn't make a lot of sense to have it. He had walked ever since, and it kind of helped with his sobriety. He was a bit of a mess before that, drinking a lot, showing up to work hungover, eating too much fast food. But the walking had helped him drop a lot of weight and had kind of made him not want to drink. Walking while you were drunk was kind of miserable. And when walking was your means of transport, you got pretty good at avoiding things that left you unable to do it. Ralph was coming into town on Tuesday, walking up the sidewalk that led from the trailer park he lived in to the grocery store when he saw the first sign. It was a normal enough white sign with big block letters at the top that read "Missing." The thing that stopped him was the face that looked out from the sign. It was a guy of about 300 pounds, thinning hair pulled back into a ponytail, and deep bags under his eyes. He was a deeply unhappy man, a man who looked like he was just looking for a hole to die in. And if it had a beer in it, then all the better. The eyes that stared out of that poster looked like the eyes that stared from between the bars of a drunk tank, and they had more than once. Ralph reached out and took the sign, staring into eyes that he hadn't seen in years. He was looking at himself, just a past version of himself, a version 2 or 3 years out of date. Out of date was a good way to describe it, like spoiled milk. Missing Ralph Gilbert, address 9733 Erin Way, trailer 17. Last seen April 23rd, 2023, walking along the shoulder of the road. Call Filibuster Sheriff's Office with any information. Cash reward possible. Cash reward. Ralph thought, It was weird to think that someone would be willing to offer a cash reward for someone like him, but he supposed it was possible. The friends he had now certainly valued him more than his bitch of an ex-wife, or either of his ungrateful kids had, more than the family he had left too, for that matter. He put the flyer back up, thinking it was weird that they hadn't just come out to the house to see if he was there. He had been there for a week after the what, he thought. The night that something had happened, something Ralph couldn't really remember. He kept walking up the street, enjoying the later afternoon as it dwindled towards dusk. This was his favorite time to walk, he thought. The weather was hot, even for early May, and he spent most days inside due to the heat and the way the sun had made his eyes hurt lately. The evening walks were about the best thing for him, and he couldn't wait till autumn came and he could stand to walk during the day again. The last thing he wanted to do was lose his progress. 2021 had been a pretty turbulent year for Ralph, but not all of it had been bad. He had started noticing that the walking was making him lose weight and that he felt better about being more active. It would have been very easy to sit on his couch and feel bad about it. He had certainly done that for a while, but as his food ran out and the money he had gotten from his disability payments had started to dwindle, he knew he was going to need to do something. That was how the walking had started. Walk to the grocery store, walk to McDonald's, walk to the 24/7 Phil that he worked nights at, and walk home. After a while, people in the trailer park started noticing he was walking, and they would offer to pay him if he would walk their dogs. Pretty soon, Ralph had a bunch of mutts on leashes and he became known as the dog man. Soon people came to walk their dogs with him, and Ralph felt like he finally had friends. He hadn't had friends since high school, and the ones he'd had then had never led him into anything healthy. These guys were walking with him, helping him find shoes that wouldn't pinch his feet and give him blisters, suggesting pants that wouldn't give him a heat rash. And one day, Ralph hopped on the scale and discovered he had lost 50 pounds. By 2022, it was 100, and by the next year, he was at 180 and feeling better than he ever had. His trips to McDonald's were down to once a week. His dog walking was making enough money to keep his bills paid and his fridge filled, and Ralph felt better than he had in years. He had felt like that right up until last week when something had happened. As Ralph came into town, he saw more of the signs hanging on the poles and was a little curious as to why no one had come to the trailer to check on him if they were so worried. He had been there all week, and they could have come and knocked. Ralph had been kind of out of it the last week, though, and he was worried that he might have caught something. He barely remembered stumbling home after. Whatever had happened, Ralph hadn't liked that. It reminded him of being drunk and out of control again. How many times had he stumbled into this trailer after a night of drinking to find that he couldn't remember how he'd gotten there? He sat on his couch, just looking at the dark television, and suddenly he wondered where the groceries had gone. That was when he remembered that he'd been carrying groceries. He had been coming back from the Forest Hill grocer, bags bulging in his hands, and he had come around the corner, Matheson Curve. And then, he didn't know, something had made him squint and he thought, oh shit, there goes my milk. And then he had been walking back into his trailer. As he walked into town now, he saw more missing posters, and it started to give him the creeps. Watching his own face, his false face, looking back at him was eerie, and he wanted to rip them down. He was here. He was alive. Why were they looking for him? He wasn't missing. He was walking up the road. He passed people, side-eyeing them as if expecting to be recognized, but they just walked right past him without a look back. That was weird, Ralph thought. Yeah, he'd been gone for a week, but people surely hadn't forgotten him that quickly. He'd been sitting in his trailer for a week before he'd thought that a walk had seemed like a good idea. It was weird. The food should have run out by now, but Ralph really hadn't been hungry. He'd moved between the living room and bedroom like a sleepwalker, sleeping like he hadn't done since he was still 300 pounds of lazy couch potato. He hadn't felt like he needed to eat anything either, though, and that was rare. Despite his weight loss, he still had to manage his prodigious appetite. He couldn't even remember drinking water that whole week, and until he'd gotten up to walk, he had worried that he was catching the flu. He had wandered around in a daze, just kind of existing, and it made him feel good when the afternoon had finally called to him. As he walked towards the supermarket, however, he suddenly wished he had stayed at home. Sitting in the parking lot of Forest Hill Grocer was a green Ford Focus that became the focus of his terror. It shouldn't have been that way. It was just a car, but there was something about it that made him stop and stare. His legs felt made of lead, and his bowels would have turned to water, except he remembered that he hadn't done that all week either. That made sense. He supposed nothing going in meant nothing coming out, right? It didn't matter. After a week of no food or water, Ralph should be dead, and that thought seemed to move him at long last. He was suddenly walking toward the car, his eyes falling on a dent in the front bumper. That was a fresh dent, though Ralph didn't know how he knew that. The door to the car was open, and Ralph climbed into the back seat like a sleepwalker. He sat there, waiting for something to happen, feeling kind of silly. This was stupid. The owner of the Focus would come back and ask him what the hell he thought he was doing. He would call the cops. Ralph would go to jail, and then he'd be in big trouble. Well, Ralph thought, at least then they would know where he was. Ralph supposed they could take the signs down if he was sitting in a jail cell. Finally, after an indeterminable amount of time, the owner came out with groceries in brown paper bags. He was a young kid, maybe 20 or 22, and when he opened the back door, he set them inside without comment. Ralph watched him move around to the front seat and climb in, cranking the car and driving off. The further they went, the more sure Ralph was that the kid would see him. The kid would look in the rearview mirror, see Ralph sitting there and freak out. He might have a wreck, and Ralph would feel terrible about that. The longer they rode without the kid commenting on his presence, the stranger it all felt. Ralph leaned toward the kid a little, meaning to tap him, but as he did, he caught a look at the rearview mirror and stopped. The back seat in the mirror was empty, except for the groceries. That's when he remembered, and suddenly Ralph wasn't in the kid's focus anymore. Suddenly he was back on the side of the road, near the guardrail for Matheson Curve, and he could see the headlights in his eyes again. The kid had been going too fast, hot-roading around, and his tires had screeched as he hit Ralph. Ralph's groceries had gone everywhere, his milk squishing under the tire as his lettuce rolled under the guardrail. Moaning and groaning as he lay dying, the hit had thrown him back, bringing him to rest against the metal rail that had broken his back. He had looked at the kid, begging him to help him, and in his panic, the kid had done the only thing he could think to do. He had pushed Ralph over the side of the rail and into the drop below. It was night now, and Ralph was looking over that rail again. He couldn't see his body down below. It had fallen to the bottom and likely been picked clean by scavengers. But he knew it was down there. Ralph would likely go on to be a town legend, someone who had just disappeared one day after making a slight splash in Filibuster. But for now, all he could do was look down into the ravine and wonder what to do next. He had read some ghost stories when he was younger and wrote a few when he got older, but it wasn't every day that you became one. Something wafted past on a stray wind, and when Ralph caught it, he realized it was one of the missing posters. An idea occurred to him, and he thought maybe he wouldn't have to stay a mystery. Officer Vermis stood by the guardrail, ready to catch the kid if he decided to take a nosedive. It was pretty high. He might opt for a short flight over a lengthy prison sentence, but Vermis doubted it. The wind pushed his hair just as it did the officer's jacket, and he pointed down almost accusingly as he turned to the kid. "Is this where you pushed the body over?" Vermis asked. The kid, Tyler Michette, nodded before being taken back to the station in the back of a different squad car. Vermis sighed. That was going to be some hard canvassing, but they would find Ralph Gilbert. When they had gone to the kid's house, he had as good as confessed on the spot, and that had made it all very easy. He was repentant, very sorry, and very young, and some soft-hearted judge would probably not insist on the death penalty for him. It was unlikely he would never operate a motor vehicle again, not unless the state prison let him run a tractor or something, and he supposed that would have to be good enough. It was weird, though. The police would have probably never known about the accident if it hadn't been for the tip they had gotten. Looking at Ralph's picture on the front of the poster, Vermis remembered the night they'd taken his license. He'd been a bad drunk, but he'd turned it around, and Vermis hated that he had to end up like this. It was a bigger shame that the kid had his life ruined by a moment of inattention, but those were the breaks. He flipped it over, looking at the odd writing on the back. It looked like it had been done with mucus, except it was a fluorescent green like the slime they used to dump on the kids on the shows his boys had watched when they were younger. He didn't know what had written it, and he didn't care. They could take Ralph Gilbert out of the unsolved case file and put him in the closed case pile, and that was good enough for him. The message read, "Green Ford Focus, dent in the front bumper. Kid hit Ralph Gilbert about a week ago on Matheson Curve. Body in the ravine. Don't let him rot down there." Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.